The basement air tasted like mildew and forgotten dreams. It was cold down here, the kind of damp cold that settles into your bones and makes a man's arthritis scream in protest. This used to be my workshop, my sanctuary where I fixed toasters for the neighbors and built birdhouses for Terrence when he was small enough to still look at me with wonder. Now it was my prison, a 10 by 10 concrete box with one small window that looked out onto the dirt and the weeds growing against the foundation. I sat on the edge of the cot they had set up next to the furnace, listening to the heavy footsteps of my son and his wife walking above my head on the hardwood floors I had paid for 30 years ago. Every step they took sounded like a stomp on my chest, reminding me that I was no longer the master of this house. I was just a guest, an unwanted guest who had overstayed his welcome. I looked at my old leather suitcase sitting in the corner, the same one I had carried on the rails for 40 years. It was battered and scarred just like me, and right now it held everything I owned in this world, or at least everything they thought I owned. Inside that suitcase, wrapped in a pair of wool socks, was the envelope, the deed to the land they thought was worthless, the paper that proved I was a millionaire while they treated me like a beggar. I wanted to open it. I wanted to look at it just to remind myself that I had the power, but I couldn't risk it. Ashley had eyes like a hawk, and she was looking for any reason to tear this room apart. Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairs flew open and light flooded down the wooden steps, blinding me for a second. Then I heard the click-clack of Ashley's heels descending the stairs fast and aggressive. She didn't knock. She didn't ask if I was decent. She just marched into my space with Terrence trailing behind her, looking at his shoes like a dog that knows it has done something wrong. Ashley stood in the center of the room, her arms crossed over her chest, looking around with a sneer of disgust, as if my very presence was contaminating the air in her basement. "We need to talk." "Caleb," she said, her voice sharp and devoid of any warmth. "The electric bill came today, and it is through the roof. Having another person in the house is costing us a fortune. We can't afford to keep supporting you if you aren't contributing." I looked at her from my cot, my hands resting on my knees, trying to keep them from shaking. I said, "Ashley, I pay for my own food. I keep the lights off down here. I don't use the heat. What more do you want from me? I want fair market value," she snapped. She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket and unfolded it, smoothing it out with her manicured fingers. "I did the math. Rent for a room in this neighborhood, plus utilities, plus the inconvenience fee of having to take care of an elderly man, comes to $1,500 a month, starting immediately." $1,500, the number hung in the damp air like a guillotine blade. I felt the blood drain from my face, not because I didn't have the money, I had millions in potential assets, but because she knew exactly what my fixed income was. She knew down to the penny. "Ashley," I said, my voice low and steady, playing the part of the desperate old man. "You know, my railroad pension is only $1,200 a month. That is everything I get. If I give you $1,500, I will have negative $300. I won't be able to buy my medicine. I won't be able to buy a bar of soap." She shrugged, as if my survival was a minor logistical problem that wasn't her concern. "Well, then you better find a side hustle, Caleb, or maybe you should have saved more money instead of relying on a dead man's inheritance that never came either. You pay the $1,500 on the first of the month, or you pack that sad little suitcase and get out on the street. I am not running a homeless shelter here. This is prime real estate, and we need the income." Terrence finally looked up, his eyes wet and pleading, but not pleading with her, pleading with me to just accept it, to just die quietly. So his life would be easier, he said. "Dad, please just try to understand. We are under a lot of pressure. Maybe you can get a loan. Maybe you can sell some of your old tools." I looked at my son and I saw a stranger. I saw a man who would watch his father starve to keep his wife happy. I looked back at Ashley and I saw the triumph in her eyes. She knew I couldn't pay. She wasn't asking for rent. She was serving me an eviction notice disguised as a bill. She smiled a cruel, thin smile and said, "You have until Friday. Caleb, Friday at noon, pay up or get out." They turned and walked back up the stairs, leaving me alone in the dark with the hum of the furnace for company. I sat there for a long time, my anger burning hot enough to warm the room. $1,500. She wanted to squeeze blood from a stone. She wanted to break me. But she didn't know what stone she was squeezing. I waited until I heard the front door slam and the sound of Ashley's car peeling out of the driveway, followed by Terrence's truck. I knew their routine. She was going to the mall to spend money she didn't have, and he was going to the bar to drink away his guilt. I was alone. I reached under the mattress of the cot and pulled out the burner phone I had bought at the gas station 3 days ago. A cheap plastic thing that was my lifeline to the truth. I dialed the number. I had memorized a number with an Alabama area code. It rang twice, and then a deep, gravelly voice answered. Darnell Washington, attorney at law. Darnell, it is Caleb, I whispered, eyeing the stairs, making sure I was truly alone. Caleb, you old son of a gun. Darnell's voice boomed, warm and familiar. Brings me back to the days we played stickball in the street. Listen to me. I have been going over the geological surveys on your daddy's land. And Caleb, you need to sit down. Are you sitting down? I am sitting. Darnell, tell me, is it bad? Bad. Darnell laughed, a rich, deep sound that shook the speaker. Bad is not the word, Caleb. Listen, those 3 farms your daddy left you, the ones Ashley thinks are just dirt and weeds, they are sitting right on top of the Smackover Formation. We aren't talking about cotton anymore, Caleb, and we aren't talking about oil either. We are talking about lithium. Lithium, I repeated the word, feeling strange on my tongue. Yes, sir. Lithium, the white gold, Darnell said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The battery companies are fighting tooth and nail for land down here right now. Greentech Energy just finished a survey on the adjacent lot, and they confirmed the deposit runs deep, right under your property. Silas knew it, Caleb. He knew it for years, and he sat on it waiting for the right time, waiting for you. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, getting lost in my gray beard. My father, that stubborn old man, had left me a gold mine, and I had left him to die alone. Guilt washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. How much? Darnell, preliminary estimates, Darnell said, pausing for effect. If you lease the mineral rights and keep the surface rights, you are looking at a signing bonus of $5 million in royalties that could pay you $500,000 a year for the next 20 years, and that is a conservative estimate. Caleb, you are a rich man. You are richer than anyone in that house has ever dreamed of being $5 million. The number echoed in my head, bouncing off the concrete walls. $5 million, while my daughter-in-law was threatening to throw me on the street for $1,500. I looked at the ceiling, at the floorboards that separated my poverty from their greed, and I felt a smile forming on my face, a smile that hadn't been there in years. Keep it quiet, Darnell, I said, my voice steady. Do not file the final papers yet. I need a few days. You plotting something, Caleb? Darnell asked, knowing me too well. I am just planning a family reunion, I said, and hung up the phone. I hid it back under the mattress, my heart racing, not with fear this time, but with the thrill of the hunt. I had the ace of spades in my pocket, and they were betting pennies against me. But the victory was short-lived. 2 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, just 1 day before the rent deadline, I heard the front door open again. But this time there were 3 sets of footsteps. Ashley's sharp clicks, Terrence's heavy thud, and a third set squeaky rubber soles like cheap orthopedic shoes. I didn't move from my cot. I just waited, pretending to read an old newspaper. The door to the basement opened and Ashley came down. But her face was different. She wasn't sneering. She was wearing a mask of fake concern, a look of tragedy practiced in the mirror. Dad, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetener. We have a visitor. We brought someone to help you. She stepped aside and a man walked down the stairs. He was tall and thin with a complexion like paste and a suit that was too big for him. He smelled of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. He held a clipboard against his chest like a shield. And he looked at me, not as a person, but as a vacancy to be filled. Mr. Jenkins, the man said, his voice nasally and irritating. My name is Mr. Henderson. I am the intake coordinator for Shady Pines Senior Living Facility. Your family has reached out to us because they are very concerned about your ability to care for yourself. Shady Pines. The name hit me like a physical blow. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Shady Pines. It was the place where people went to be forgotten. It was the place where the state sent the indigent and the unwanted. It was a warehouse for the dying where the smell of urine was permanent and the staff turnover was higher than the survival rate. I stood up, my knees cracking. I don't need a facility, I said, looking past him to Terrence, who was cowering at the top of the stairs, unable to even come down and look me in the face. I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Ashley stepped forward, shaking her head sadly. Oh, Dad, don't be difficult. Look at you, living in a basement, unable to pay rent, barely eating. We can't provide the level of care you need anymore. It is irresponsible of us to keep you here when you are clearly struggling. Shady Pines is very affordable, and Mr. Henderson says they have a bed opening up next week. It is fate. It is not fate. It is a disposal service. I snapped, my anger flaring up. I am not going to Shady Pines. I am not going anywhere. Mr. Henderson took a step forward, looking at the room, making notes on his clipboard, writing off my life with a cheap ballpoint pen. Mr. Jenkins, he said, ignoring my protest, we have a semi-private room available. The state subsidy will cover most of it, and your son has agreed to sign over your pension checks to cover the rest. It is a very simple process. We can have the transport van here on Tuesday morning, Tuesday 5 days away. They were giving me 5 days before they locked me away and stole my $1,200 stealing. The very pittance they claimed wasn't enough. They didn't want me to pay rent. They wanted me gone, and they wanted to keep the check. Ashley smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who has cornered its prey. She said, "It is for the best. Caleb, really, it is. You will make friends. You will play bingo. It will be so much better than sitting down here in the dark, being a burden to your son. Tuesday morning, have your bag packed." She turned to Mr. Henderson and started chatting about paperwork, about signatures, about how relieved she was to find a safe place for her beloved father-in-law, ignoring the man standing 3 feet away from her, who was worth more than the entire building she was trying to send him to. I watched them walk up the stairs, Mr. Henderson talking about meal plans and sedation schedules, and I felt a cold calm settle over me like a blanket of snow. They thought they had won. They thought they were shipping off a piece of trash to the dump on Tuesday, but they didn't know that Tuesday was a long way off, and a lot can happen in 5 days, especially when you have a secret that burns hotter than the sun and a will of iron forged on the railroad tracks. I looked at my suitcase. I looked at the ceiling, and I whispered to the empty room. "You want me out, Ashley? Fine. I will go. But when I go, I am taking the world with me." The plan to get me into Shady Pines was moving faster than a freight train on a downhill slope, and I knew that if I didn't derail it, I would be eating pureed peas and staring at a wall by Tuesday morning, so I decided it was time to give them exactly what they wanted. Only I was going to give it to them in a way that would make them regret ever looking in my direction. I knew that Ashley, with her pristine white carpets and her nose that turned up at the smell of bacon frying, had a weak stomach. She wanted the money from an old man, but she didn't want the reality of an old man. So I decided to become her worst nightmare. I went into the small bathroom attached to the basement, a room that smelled of rust and cold water, and I took a carton of apple juice I had stashed from my lunch. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror, my gray beard unkempt, my eyes tired but burning with a fire they hadn't seen in decades, and I poured the warm, sticky juice right down the front of my trousers, soaking the fabric until it looked dark and heavy. It was the most humiliating thing I had ever done to myself, a man who had built bridges and laid track, but war is war, and in war, you get dirty. I waited a few minutes, letting the stain settle, letting the smell of sweet fermentation rise up, and then I shuffled up the stairs, dragging my left leg heavier than usual, making sure my boots scraped loudly against the wood. I walked into the living room where Ashley was sitting on her beige Italian sofa, flipping through a magazine about luxury homes, and Terrence was pacing back and forth on the phone, probably begging a creditor for 24 more hours. They stopped when they saw me. Ashley looked up annoyed, ready to tell me to go back down to my hole, but then her eyes dropped to my waist and her face went from annoyance to pure, unadulterated horror. She gasped, dropping the magazine, her hands flying to her mouth as if she were about to vomit. "Oh my God," she screamed, scrambling backward over the top of the sofa, her heels digging into the cushions. "Caleb, what did you do? You are disgusting. Look at you. You wet yourself. You filthy old animal. Get away from the rug. Get away from the furniture." I stood there, swaying slightly, letting my jaw hang slack, giving them the empty stare of a man whose lights were flickering out. I mumbled something incoherent, something about the bathroom door being locked, about not making it in time, playing the part of the confused geriatric to perfection. Terrence hung up the phone and stared at me, his face twisting in a mix of shame and revulsion. He didn't move to help me. He didn't rush to get a towel. He just stood there looking at his father like I was a broken appliance leaking oil on his driveway. "Dad," he groaned. "Dad, seriously. Come on, man, you can't do this here. Go back downstairs, go change." I took a step toward them, my hand outstretched as if asking for help, and Ashley shrieked like a banshee. "Don't you touch me. Do not come any closer, Terrence. Do something, get him out. Here, I am not cleaning this up, do you hear me? I am not changing his diapers. I am not scrubbing his urine out of the hardwood. This is it. This is the final straw. He goes to Shady Pines today. Not Tuesday today." She was hyperventilating, her face pale, wiping her hands on her dress as if the mere sight of me had contaminated her. I watched her unravel, and a dark satisfaction curled in my gut. She wanted my millions, but she couldn't handle a little apple juice. She was weak and greedy. People who are weak make mistakes. Terrence grabbed my arm, his grip rough, not gentle like a son should be, and he steered me toward the kitchen, away from his precious wife and her expensive rugs. "Dad, you have to clean yourself up," he hissed in my ear. "This is embarrassing." "Ashley is right. We can't handle this anymore." He pushed me into a chair at the kitchen table and grabbed a roll of paper towels, throwing them at me. But then he stopped. He looked at me, and I saw a light bulb go off in his desperate eyes, the kind of idea that is born from panic. He ran out of the room, leaving me sitting there in my sticky pants, and came back 10 seconds later with a leather folder and a fancy pen. He slammed them down on the table, pushing aside the paper towels. "Dad, listen to me," he said, his voice frantic, sweating beading on his forehead. "Since you are having trouble, since you are clearly not well, we need to make sure you are taken care of, right? I need you to sign this. It is just a form for the doctors. It will let us get you the best care, get you a private room at the home." I looked down at the paper. It wasn't a medical form. I knew what a power of attorney looked like. I had signed one for my own father 40 years ago. This document would give him total control over my finances, my medical decisions, my property, and my life. If I signed this, he could sell the farms, he could drain the accounts, he could bury me in a state facility, and I would never see the light of day again. He uncapped the pen and shoved it into my hand, his fingers pressing over mine, trying to force a grip. "Sign it, Dad, right here on the line. Just write your name, Caleb Jenkins. Do it now before you have another accident." I looked at his hand on mine, the same hand I had held when he was getting stitches after falling off his bike, the hand of the man who was now trying to sign away my freedom. I let my hand start to shake. It started as a small tremor, a vibration in the wrist, and then I let it grow. I let the Parkinson's act take over my whole arm, jerking and twitching violently. "I can't," I stammered, my voice wavering. "I can't hold it, son. It is jumping." "Just steady your hand," Terrence yelled, losing his patience, grabbing my wrist harder, trying to force the pen to the paper. "Just make an X. Dad, I don't care. Just make a mark." Ashley came into the kitchen holding a bottle of bleach and a rag, wearing rubber gloves, looking at us with disgust. "Make him sign it." "Terrence," she snapped, "get the power of attorney and then get him in the shower. I can smell him." From here, I ramped up the performance, my arm flailing like a fish on a deck, the pen scratching wild, jagged lines across the tablecloth, missing the paper entirely. Then, with a convulsive jerk that I aimed perfectly, I slammed my hand into the open bottle of black calligraphy ink that Ashley had left on the table from addressing her open house invitations earlier that day. The bottle flew across the table, spinning in the air, and crashed right onto the document, exploding like a squid releasing its defense. A wave of thick, permanent black ink washed over the white paper, soaking into the fibers, obliterating the signature line, turning the legal document into a sodden, illegible mess. The ink dripped off the edge of the table, splashing onto Terrence's designer sweatpants and splattering across Ashley's pristine white blouse. "No," Ashley screamed, looking down at the black spots blooming on her chest. "You clumsy old fool. Look what you did. This is silk. This is dry clean. Only." Terrence stared at the ruined document, the ink pooling like black blood, killing his hopes of an easy takeover. He threw the pen across the room, and it hit the refrigerator with a crack. He roared in frustration, grabbing his hair, pulling at it. "Dad, why can't you just do one thing, right? Why do you have to ruin everything?" I sat there, my hand covered in ink, dripping onto the floor, looking at them with my mouth open, feigning confusion. But inside I was laughing. I was laughing so hard my soul shook. I mumbled, "I am sorry, son. I am sorry. I made a mess." "Get him out of here," Ashley hissed, her eyes filled with tears of rage. "Get him in the shower and lock him in the basement. I am calling the lawyer. We will have to draw up a new one, and we are doing it tomorrow morning. I don't care if we have to guide his hand. Like a child, he is signing it tomorrow." Terrence dragged me to the bathroom, shoved me in, and turned on the water, leaving me to clean myself up. He didn't help. He just slammed the door, and I heard him lock it from the outside. I stripped off the sticky clothes, washed the ink from my hands, and stood under the hot water, letting the heat soothe my aching joints. They thought I was broken. They thought I was senile, but I had just bought myself 12 more hours. That night, the house was quiet, the kind of heavy silence that comes after a storm. I waited until the clock on the wall read 2 in the morning. I listened at the door of the basement, and I heard nothing. I picked the lock with a piece of wire I had pulled from the old radio in my workshop, a trick I learned in the rail yards when we got locked out of the supply shed. The door clicked open silently. I crept up the stairs, my socks moving noiselessly on the wood, avoiding the squeaky step on the third riser. I wasn't trying to escape. Not yet. I needed information. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I moved down the hallway past their bedroom where I could hear Terrence snoring a fitful, jagged sound, and I stopped at the door to the spare room. The room! Ashley called her home office. The door was ajar, and the green light of the router blinked in the darkness. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me, my heart pounding against my ribs. I sat down at her desk, a sleek glass thing that looked too fragile to hold any real work, and I woke up her laptop. I expected a password, but Ashley was arrogant. She didn't think anyone in this house was smart enough or bold enough to touch her computer. The screen flared to life and I saw her email was open. I started scrolling, looking for lawyers, looking for nursing homes, but what I found was something far worse, something that made the bile rise in my throat again. There was a chain of emails with a subject line that read, "Promotion and Benefits." The sender was a man named Brad Sterling, the regional manager of the real estate firm where she worked. I opened the latest one, sent just 3 hours ago while Terrence was crying about his ruined pants. It read, "Baby, don't worry about the old man. If he doesn't sign tomorrow, we will find another way. Just keep Terrence distracted. I need you focused on the big account meeting next week. If you land this deal, the vice president spot is yours and we can finally stop hiding. Leave the loser husband and the senile father-in-law behind." I booked the suite at the Hilton for Tuesday to celebrate. Bring the black dress. I read it again, my hands gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. She wasn't just stealing my money, she was stealing my son's life. She was sleeping with her boss, promising him a future while she bled us dry. She was playing Terrence for a fool, using his desperation to fund her exit strategy. I scrolled down and saw her reply. "I know, Brad. I can't wait to be done with this heavy lifting. Terrence is useless. He can't even get his dad to sign a paper without making a mess. But once I get the power of attorney, I will liquidate the house dump. Caleb in the state ward and file for divorce. Terrence will be left with the debt, and I will be with you. Just be patient. The old man is almost out of the way." I sat back in the chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the tears that were finally falling from my eyes. Not for me, but for my son. My stupid, blind, ungrateful son. He was a bad father's son. He was greedy and weak, but he didn't deserve this. Nobody deserved this. He was trying to kill me to save a marriage that was already dead. He was selling his soul for a woman who had already sold him out. I took my burner phone out of my pocket and I took pictures of every email, every date, every sordid detail. I captured the betrayal in high definition, creating a digital paper trail of her infidelity and her conspiracy. I saved them, I backed them up, and then I carefully closed the windows, leaving the computer exactly as I found it. I crept back out of the room, feeling heavier than I had when I went in. I walked past their bedroom door and I felt a strange pang of pity for the man sleeping inside. He was the villain in my story, but he was the victim in hers. I went back down to the basement and locked the door from the inside, sitting on my cot as the sun began to paint the sky gray. They were coming for me in the morning. They were going to force my hand. They were going to try to take everything. But now I had the ammunition to blow their world apart. I wasn't just fighting for my land anymore. I was fighting to burn Ashley's world to the ground. And as I lay down, closing my eyes for a few minutes of rest, I knew that the shaking old man was gone, and in his place was a conductor who was about to drive this train right off the cliff. The vibration of the cheap burner phone under my pillow felt like a jackhammer against my skull in the quiet of the basement. I waited until the footsteps upstairs stopped moving, until the house settled into its morning rhythm. Before I dared to answer it, I whispered into the plastic mesh, knowing that one wrong word could blow my cover. Darnell sounded breathless on the other end, his voice crackling with static and urgency. "Caleb, we have a problem. The board at Green Tech is getting skittish. They want to lock this down before the quarterly report goes public. They moved up the timeline. They need your signature on the mineral rights lease in person, and they need it within 48 hours, or they are going to walk away from the deal and take their $20 million to the next county." I sat up on the cot, my joints popping like dry twigs, panic flaring in my chest. I was a prisoner in my own home, monitored by a woman who watched the odometer on my truck and a son who was too scared to let me out of his sight. How was I supposed to get to Alabama in 2 days without raising an army of red flags? I couldn't just say I was going for a walk and end up 3 states away. I needed a reason. I needed a bait so shiny and so irresistible that they would drive me there themselves. I hung up the phone and hid it back inside the lining of my suitcase. I sat there in the dark for a moment, channeling every ounce of cunning my father Silas had beaten into me. I remembered the stories he used to tell me when I was a boy. Stories about burying his earnings in mason jars because he didn't trust the white banks in town. It was a kernel of truth that I could spin into a golden lie. I dragged myself up the stairs, putting on my best performance of the confused old man. I shuffled into the kitchen where Ashley was drinking a green smoothie that looked like pond scum, and Terrence was staring at his phone, looking miserable. Ashley looked up, her lip curling in that familiar sneer she reserved just for me, and said, "What do you want, Caleb? Breakfast isn't until 8. I leaned against the doorframe, rubbing my forehead as if I were trying to massage a memory back to life. I said in a shaky voice, "I had a dream last night, Ashley. A vivid dream about the old oak tree behind Daddy's barn. I remember now. I remember what he told me before I left home 50 years ago." Ashley rolled her eyes and went back to her phone, probably texting her lover about her big promotion. But Terrence looked up. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I lowered my voice, forcing them to lean in. I said, "Silas didn't trust banks, son. Never did. He told me he buried a metal box under the roots of the great oak. The one with the lightning scar. He said he put his life savings in there, gold coins from the war, silver dollars, maybe even some jewelry from your grandmother. He said it was for a rainy day." I watched the transformation happen in real time. It was like watching a shark smell blood in the water. Ashley froze her thumb, hovering. Over her screen, she slowly lowered the phone and looked at me, her eyes wide and hungry. The sneer vanished, replaced by a look of predatory interest. "Gold?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave. "Are you sure, Caleb? Are you sure it wasn't just a senile dream?" I shook my head, feigning uncertainty. "I don't know. Maybe it was, but it felt so real. I can see the box. It was a heavy iron lockbox, rust-proof. He said it was worth a fortune back then. Lord knows what it is worth now with the price of gold." Ashley looked at Terrence, and I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was doing the math, weighing the cost of a tank of gas against the potential of a pot of gold. She stood up, dumping her smoothie into the sink, and said, "Get dressed, Caleb. Pack a bag. We are going to Alabama." Terrence looked confused. "But babe, you have your spa weekend with the girls, and I have to meet with the guys about the crypto thing." "Cancel it," she snapped, grabbing her keys from the counter. "If there is a box of gold rotting in the dirt, I am not letting some raccoon dig it up. Get the car ready. We leave in 10 minutes. The drive was a descent into a special kind of hell. Ashley insisted on driving her white SUV because she said my truck smelled like old man and failure. She shoved me into the back seat next to her dog, a nervous little designer thing named Princess that yapped every time the car hit a bump and had breath that smelled like dead fish. There was barely enough room for my legs, and my bad knee was jammed against the back of Terrence's seat, throbbing with every mile. They didn't talk to me. They talked over me as if I were a piece of luggage they had thrown in the back. Ashley turned the radio up so loud the bass rattled my teeth, playing that modern rap music where everyone is shouting and the beat sounds like a headache set to rhythm. She sang along, tapping her long fingernails on the steering wheel, ignoring my request to turn it down or to stop for a bathroom break. "Just hold it, Caleb," she shouted over the music. "We are making good time. I am not stopping at every rest area just because you have a weak bladder." I sat there clutching my knees, staring out the window as the landscape changed from the concrete sprawl of the city to the rolling green hills of the south, watching the pine trees blur past, feeling the envelope in my boot burning against my skin. I was enduring this humiliation. I was letting them treat me like a dog because I knew where the real gold was, and it wasn't in a box under a tree. Terrence spent the drive complaining about his life, about how unfair it was that his investments crashed, about how he deserved a break, never once acknowledging that he was sitting next to the man who had carried him on his shoulders, never once offering me a bottle of water or asking how I was holding up. He was completely under her spell, a weak man being led by a wicked woman. We crossed the state line into Alabama, just as the sun was starting to dip, turning the sky a bruised purple. The air got heavier, thicker with humidity and history. I felt a tightening in my chest, the old instinct of a black man entering a small southern town where the rules were different and the nights were darker. Ashley didn't notice the change. She just complained about the lack of cell service and the dusty roads. We were 10 miles from the farm, driving through a town that looked like it hadn't changed since the 60s, when I saw the blue lights flashing in the rearview mirror. My stomach dropped. Ashley cursed, slapping the steering wheel. "Great, just great," she hissed. "What does this hick want? I wasn't even speeding." She pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, the dust billowing up around the car, hiding us for a second before settling. The cop car pulled up behind us, close and aggressive. I saw the silhouette of the officer getting out. He was a big man, wide as a doorframe with a flat-brimmed hat and a hand resting on his holster. He walked slow, deliberate, taking his time, letting us sweat. Ashley rolled down the window and put on her best innocent white woman smile, the one she used to get out of parking tickets and charm manager's officer. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice pitching up high and sweet. The officer leaned down, looking into the car, his eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. He looked at Ashley, then he looked at Terrence, and his jaw tightened. Then he looked in the back seat and saw me. An old black man squeezed next to a dog, and he lingered there for a long, uncomfortable second. "License and registration," he said, his voice thick with a drawl that sounded like gravel grinding together. Ashley handed over her papers, her hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from indignation. She wasn't used to being stopped. She wasn't used to being questioned. "You folks aren't from around here, are you?" the officer asked, scanning the license. "No, sir. We are just visiting family," Ashley said, pointing a thumb back at me. "We are taking my father-in-law to see his old home. Place he is getting a little confused in his old age. Wanted to see the farm one last time." The officer grunted, looking at me again. "Step out of the car," he said, pointing a finger at me. "Me?" I asked, my voice rusty. "Yes, you step out of the car. I want to see what is in your pockets." I opened the door slowly, my knee screaming in protest, and stepped out onto the gravel, raising my hands instinctively, a habit learned from a lifetime of survival. Terrence didn't move. He didn't say a word. He just stared straight ahead, terrified. The officer patted me down. His hands, rough and intrusive. He felt the bottle of pills in my pocket, my blood pressure medication. He pulled it out, shaking it so the pills rattled loud in the quiet evening. "What is this?" he asked, holding the bottle up to the dying light. "It is my heart, medicine officer," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It is prescription." "The label is worn off," he said, peering at the orange plastic. "Looks like unmarked narcotics to me. Looks like you boys are trafficking." Ashley got out of the car then, but she didn't come to my defense. She didn't tell him it was just Lisa Nopril. She saw an opportunity so dark and twisted, it took my breath away. She walked around the car, tears instantly welling up in her eyes, her lower lip trembling. "Officer," she sobbed, throwing her hands up in a gesture of helplessness. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know. He told us it was just his heart medicine. But he has been acting so strange lately, talking about money, talking about hiding things. I tried to tell my husband we shouldn't bring him, but he insisted. Please, officer, don't arrest us. We are good people. We are just trying to help a senile old man. But if he is carrying drugs, we had no idea." I stared at her in disbelief. She was framing me. She was standing there on a dirt road in Alabama, throwing me to the wolves, using her tears to paint me as a criminal and herself as the victim. She was willing to let me go to jail in a town where people like me disappeared just to save her own skin and maybe get rid of her problem once and for all. Terrence finally turned his head, looking at his wife, then at me, and for a second I thought he would speak. I thought he would scream that it was a lie, that they were my pills, that he picked them up from the pharmacy himself, but he just looked away. He looked down at his lap, choosing his cowardice over his father. The officer looked at Ashley, his face softening just a fraction, buying the act, hooking on to the narrative she was spinning. He looked back at me, his hand tightening on the pill bottle. "Well now," he said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "Looks like we need to take a ride down to the station and sort this out. Looks like you have some explaining to do, boy." I stood there, the red clay dust covering my boots, the same boots that held the deed to a fortune, and I looked at Ashley weeping, fake tears into her hands, and I realized that the war wasn't just about money anymore. It was about survival, and I was going to have to fight dirtier than I ever had before. The officer stood there with my pill bottle in his hand, his thumb rubbing over the worn plastic cap, while Ashley sobbed her crocodile tears into her palms, creating a scene fit for a daytime soap opera, expecting him to slap the cuffs on me and drag me away, leaving her free to play the victim. But then the officer did something that made the air in my lungs freeze. He didn't reach for his handcuffs. He reached up and slowly took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were crinkled at the corners, eyes that were squinting at me, not with suspicion, but with a sudden dawning recognition that seemed to travel back through 5 decades of time. He took a step closer, his boots crunching on the gravel, and he tilted his head to the side, looking past the gray beard and the wrinkles, looking for the young man. "I used to be. Caleb," he said, his voice losing that hard edge of authority and replacing it with something that sounded like disbelief. "Caleb Jenkins. Is that you, number 42? I blinked confused. My hands still raised in the air, and I looked at him, really looked at him beneath the uniform and the weight of age. I saw the jawline of a boy I had shared a muddy field with 50 years ago, a boy who had blocked for me when I ran the winning touchdown against the Tuscaloosa Tigers in '69. "Buford," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Buford Taggart." The officer let out a laugh, a deep, booming sound that echoed off the pine trees. He lowered his hand and slapped his thigh. "Well, I will be damned," he said, a grin spreading across his face, showing teeth stained by tobacco. "I haven't seen you since graduation. I heard you went up north to work. The rails, look at you. You old son of a gun. You still look like you could run a 40-yard dash." Ashley stopped crying instantly, her sob cutting off in her throat like a hiccup. She lowered her hands, her mascara smeared perfectly on her cheeks, and she looked from me to the sheriff, her mouth hanging open in shock. She couldn't process what was happening. She had set the stage for my arrest, and instead she was watching a reunion. She stammered, "But officer, he has drugs. He is confused. He doesn't know what he is doing." Sheriff Taggart turned to look at her, and the warmth vanished from his face, instantly replaced by the cold stare of the law. He handed the pill bottle back to me, gently treating it like it was my property and not evidence, ma'am, he said, his voice flat. "This man here is a local legend. He carried this town to the state championship on a broken ankle. If he says these are his heart pills, then they are his heart pills. And if he says he is here to visit his home place, then he has earned the right to be here, without being harassed by the likes of you." He turned his back on her, dismissing her completely, and looked at me with respect. "Caleb, if you need anything while you are down here, you call the station. You hear me, anything at all. It is good to see you, brother." "Thank you, Buford," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "Thank you," he tipped. His hat got back in his cruiser and drove off, leaving us standing in the dust, leaving Ashley looking like she had swallowed a lemon, and leaving Terrence looking at me with a mixture of confusion and fear, as if he had just realized he didn't know his own father at all. "Get in the car," I said to them, my voice hard, enjoying the shift in power. "Get in the car and drive." We drove the last 10 miles in silence. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the dirt road and the angry breathing of my daughter-in-law, who was furious that her plan to dump me in an Alabama jail had backfired so spectacularly. We turned onto the long driveway that led to the farm, the property that had been in my family for 3 generations. And my heart sank when I saw it. The farmhouse was a ruin. The roof had caved in. On one side, the porch was sagging under the weight of ivy and kudzu, and the windows were dark, empty eyes staring out at the overgrown fields. It looked like a place where hope had gone to die. Ashley gasped as we pulled up, but this time it wasn't fake, it was genuine disgust. "This is it!" she shrieked, looking out the window at the rotting wood and the rusted tractor sitting in the tall grass. "This is the family estate. Caleb, are you kidding me? This is a garbage dump. There is nothing here but snakes and tetanus. I ruined my heels for this." She slammed the car door and stepped out, her expensive shoes sinking immediately into the red mud. She cursed, kicking her foot, trying to shake off the dirt. Terrence got out slowly, looking around with disappointment etched into every line of his face. He had been expecting a plantation house, something he could brag about on Instagram. Instead, he got a shack. I got out, ignoring the pain in my knee, and walked toward the old oak tree that stood behind the barn. It was massive, its branches spreading out like a canopy against the twilight sky. The only thing on this land that time hadn't managed to destroy. I walked with purpose, channeling the memory of the lie I had told them, making it look real. "The box," I said. Pointing a trembling finger at the base of the tree between two large roots, he said, "It was right there, dig. Terrence, dig for your inheritance." Terrence went to the trunk of the car and pulled out the tire iron and a small folding shovel we had brought. He walked over to the tree and started to dig. He dug with a desperation I had never seen in him, throwing dirt over his shoulder, sweating through his shirt, panting like a dog. Ashley stood over him, her arms crossed, tapping her foot, watching the hole get deeper and deeper, her eyes greedy, reflecting the dying light. I stood back, watching them, feeling the envelope in my boot, pressing against my ankle, knowing that the real treasure was under my foot and not under that tree. But I needed them to see. I needed them to feel the disappointment. I needed to break them. I hit something. Terrence shouted, the metal clanging against metal. My heart skipped a beat, even though I knew what was in there. Silas had told me about the box years ago before we stopped speaking. He told me he kept his most precious things in there, but I knew my father, and I knew his precious things weren't gold coins. "Pull it out!" Ashley screamed, pushing closer, almost falling into the hole. "Hurry up! Pull it out!" Terrence reached down and hauled up a rusted iron box about the size of a shoebox. It was heavy, covered in earth and corrosion. He set it on the ground and Ashley fell to her knees beside it, ignoring the mud now clawing at the latch with her manicured fingernails, breaking a nail in the process, cursing vilely. "Open it! Break the lock!" she hissed, picking up a rock and smashing it against the rusted padlock. It took 3 hits for the old lock to give way, the metal snapping with a dry crack. Ashley threw the lid open, her eyes wide, expecting the glitter of gold, expecting salvation, expecting the BMW, but there was no gold. Inside the box, wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly rotted away, was a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon and a small dried flower that crumbled to dust as soon as the air touched it. Ashley froze, her hands hovering over the box, her breath catching in her throat. She reached in and pulled out the letters, tearing the ribbon. Frantically, shaking them as if she expected a check to fall out, as if she expected cash to be hidden between the pages. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage that was building like a pressure cooker. "What the hell is this?" I stepped forward and looked down into the box. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my mother's handwriting. Letters she had written to Silas when he was overseas in the war. Letters of love and longing. The only things that had kept him alive in the trenches. The only things he valued more than life itself. "It is his treasure," I said softly. "It is the love letters from my mother." Ashley stared at me, and then she screamed a sound so raw and ugly it scared the crows from the trees. She stood up and kicked the box, sending the letters flying into the mud, scattering the memories of my parents into the dirt. She turned on me, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "Love letters," she screeched. "You dragged us all the way to Alabama. You made me drive 10 hours. You made me deal with the police and the mud and the heat for a box of old paper. Are you insane? Are you completely demented? You senile old bat, there is no gold, there is no money. You lied to us, or you are just too stupid to remember the truth." She picked up a handful of the letters and threw them at my face, the paper hitting me harmlessly, fluttering to the ground like dead leaves. "I hate you," she screamed, getting in my face, spitting as she yelled. "I hate you and your worthless family and your rotting farm. You are useless, Caleb. You are a burden, and I am done pretending. I am done taking care of you. We are leaving, and we are leaving you here. You can rot with your letters." Terrence stood there watching his wife desecrate his grandparents. Memories watching her scream at his father, and he didn't say a word. He didn't pick up the letters. He didn't tell her to stop. He just looked at the empty box, and then he looked at me with eyes that were cold and dead, blaming me for his lack of a fortune, blaming me for his own failure. I looked at him. I looked at the son I had raised, the boy I had loved more than my own life, and I felt the last thread of connection snap. I felt the love wither and die, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I looked at the scattered letters, the testimony of a love he would never understand, and then I looked him dead in the eye. "You just lost your last chance, son," I said, my voice low and steady, carrying over the sound of Ashley's screaming. "Just lost your last chance." Terrence frowned, confused by the shift in my tone, confused by the lack of fear in my eyes. "Dad, what are you talking about? Let's just go." This was a waste of time. I didn't answer him. I just bent down and picked up one of the letters, wiping the mud from my mother's handwriting, and placed it gently in my pocket. I stood up straight, my bad knee forgotten. and I walked toward the car, not waiting for them, not asking for permission. I walked with the stride of a man who owns the ground. He walks on. Ashley was still screaming, kicking the dirt, having a tantrum like a toddler, but I didn't hear her anymore. All I heard was the wind in the trees whispering the word lithium and the sound of a train coming down the track, a train that was going to run them over and leave them behind. I got in the back seat of the car and stared straight ahead, waiting for them to finish their display of greed and stupidity, knowing that tomorrow I was going to meet with Green Tech, and tomorrow the old man they thought was trash was going to become the king of the mountain. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy like a wet wool blanket pressing down on your chest. I lay on my cot in the basement listening to the settling of the foundation and the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator upstairs, waiting for the digital clock on my burner phone to hit 2 in the morning. My joints were stiff and my bad knee was throbbing a dull ache that usually signaled rain, but tonight it signaled danger. I had to move, and I had to move like a ghost in a house full of light sleepers who were listening for the sound of money dropping. I swung my legs over the side of the cot and pulled on my boots, lacing them up slow and tight, suppressing the grunt of effort that wanted to escape my lips. I grabbed my old denim jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of diesel and grease from my days at the rail yard, and I crept toward the basement window. It was a tight squeeze for a man of my size and age, but desperation has a way of making you flexible. I pushed the sash up, inch by inch, praying the rusted hinges wouldn't scream, and I hauled myself up and out into the cool night air, dragging my body through the dirt and the damp grass like a soldier escaping enemy lines. I didn't take my truck. Ashley knew the mileage down to the decimal point. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to the all-night diner on the edge of town, the neon sign buzzing and flickering like a dying heartbeat. Darnell was waiting for me in the back booth, a booth where we had shared coffee and pie 1,000 times over the last 50 years. But tonight there was no pie on the table, just a thick stack of legal documents and a man in a suit who looked out of place among the truckers and the night shift workers. Darnell introduced him as Mr. Sterling, the Senior Acquisitions Director for Green Tech Energy. He was a young man with a firm handshake and eyes that didn't look at my dirty jacket or my gray beard, but looked straight at me with a mixture of respect and hunger. He didn't see an old man, he saw the gatekeeper to a fortune. Mr. Jenkins Sterling said, his voice low and serious. "We have completed the final geological assays on your father's property. The results are frankly staggering. The lithium deposit running beneath those cotton fields is one of the purest we have seen in North America. It is not just a farm, sir, it is a strategic asset for the future of renewable energy." He slid the paperwork across the Formica table and I looked at the numbers, and for a second I thought my old eyes were playing tricks on me. $20 million up front as a signing bonus for the lease and a 5% equity stake in the mining operation, plus royalties for every ton of ore extracted for the next 20 years. I sat there staring at the zeros, feeling the breath leave my lungs. $20 million, enough to buy this whole town, enough to fix every mistake I ever made, enough to save my son if he was worth saving. But was he worth saving? That was the question that had been haunting me since I heard them in the kitchen, since I saw Ashley throw my dinner in the trash, since I saw my son stand by and let it happen. $20 million in the hands of a fool is just a tragedy waiting to happen, and $20 million in the hands of a viper like Ashley is a weapon. I looked at Darnell and then at Sterling, and I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a sledgehammer. I said, "I will sign it. I will lease you the rights and I will give you the land. But I have a condition, a non-negotiable condition." Sterling leaned in, listening intently. "Anything." "Mr. Jenkins, name it." "I want a blind trust," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I want the ownership of this deal buried so deep that even a forensic accountant would need a shovel to find it. I want my name kept off every press release, every public filing, and every piece of paper that sees the light of day. For exactly 30 days, I want Green Tech to announce the project. I want the world to know there is a lithium mine in Alabama, but I don't want anyone knowing Caleb Jenkins is the man holding the keys." Darnell frowned, looking at me over his glasses. "Caleb, 30 days is a long time. Why wait? The money will be in your account by noon tomorrow. You could walk in there and buy that BMW she wants just to set it on fire in the driveway." I shook my head, looking out the window at the empty parking lot. "I don't want to buy her a car, Darnell. I want to see who they really are. I want to see what they do when they think the walls are closing in. When they think I am just a broke old burden. I want to see how deep the rot goes before I decide whether to cut it out or let it kill them 30 days. That is the test. If they can treat me with a shred of human decency when I have nothing, then maybe they deserve something. But if they try to destroy me, well, then I want to watch them break their own teeth trying to bite a rock. Sterling looked at me and nodded slowly. Understanding the game I was playing, agreed Mr. Jenkins, total anonymity. For 30 days, we will structure the payments through shell corporations and hold the deed in escrow. Nobody will know until you give the word. I signed the papers, the scratch of the pen on the paper sounding loud in the quiet diner. I signed my name, Caleb Jenkins. The name my father gave me, the name I had carried with pride through poverty and hardship, and with that signature, I went from being a nuisance in a basement to a man worth $20 million. I shook hands with Sterling, hugged Darnell, and walked back out into the night. The contract folded and hidden deep in my inside pocket, right next to my heart. The walk back felt different. The air smelled sweeter. The ground felt firmer under my boots. I wasn't just walking. I was marching to war. I slipped back through the basement window, my body protesting the indignity, but my spirit soaring. I brushed the dirt off my clothes and sat on my cot, waiting for the dawn, feeling the power of the secret burning in my chest. But secrets are hard to keep in a house full of spies. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the overhead light snapped on, blinding me. I sat up, blinking, shielding my eyes, and there was Ashley standing at the bottom of the stairs, her silk robe pulled tight around her waist, her hair in rollers, looking like a demon that had just rolled out of bed. "Where were you?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that cut through the morning air like a knife. "I woke up at 3 to get a glass of water and I checked on you. You weren't in your bed. Caleb, don't lie to me. I checked the bathroom. I checked the yard. You were gone." I looked at her, trying to slow my heart rate, trying to summon the confused old man act. I rubbed my face and mumbled, "I was just walking, Ashley. My legs get restless at night, the cramps. They wake me up. I just needed to walk it off around the block." "Walking," she repeated, stepping closer, her eyes scanning the room, scanning me, looking for clues, looking for guilt. "Walking around the block at 3 and the morning in this neighborhood. Do you know how crazy that sounds? Do you know what the neighbors would think if they saw you shuffling around like a zombie? They would call the police. They would think you have dementia, which honestly is becoming more and more obvious." She took another step into my space, her nose twitching, sniffing the air. She smelled the diner coffee on me. She smelled the outside air, and her paranoia flared up like a match. She didn't believe I was walking. She believed I was hiding something. She believed I was holding out on her. "You are lying," she spat. "You were meeting someone, weren't you? Who was it, Caleb? Do you have a stash somewhere? Did you go to dig up that imaginary box of gold you lied about in Alabama? Are you hiding money from us while we drown in debt, feeding you and housing you?" I looked up at her, at the greed distorting her pretty face, and I almost laughed. She was so close to the truth and yet so far away. She thought I was hiding a few $100s in a coffee can. She couldn't comprehend that I was hiding an empire. "I don't have any money." "Ashley," I said, my voice weary, "I told you I just went for a walk. I am an old man. I don't sleep well." She didn't buy it. She lunged forward, pushing me back onto the cot, and started tearing through my things. She grabbed my suitcase, dumping it upside down on the floor, my old clothes spilling out, my spare socks, my Bible, my few mementos scattering across the concrete. She kicked through them with her slippered foot, looking for cash, looking for a bank book, looking for anything she could steal. She grabbed my denim jacket, the one I had just taken off, and shook it violently, listening for the rattle of coins or the crinkle of paper. I held my breath, praying she wouldn't check the inside pocket, the pocket where the contract was resting. But she just felt the outside pockets, finding nothing but a few lint-covered peppermints and a used handkerchief. She threw the jacket on the floor in disgust. Then her eyes landed on the small bedside table where I had emptied my pockets before laying down there amidst the loose change, and the keys was the business card Sterling had given me, a thick, cream-colored card with green embossed lettering. Green Tech Energy Solutions. She snatched it up, holding it to the light, squinting at it. "Green Tech," she read out loud, her voice dripping with scorn. "What is this? Caleb Energy Solutions? Are you trying to sell solar panels now? Is that your big plan to contribute to this household door-to-door sales at 75? I felt a surge of panic, but I pushed it down. I shrugged, forcing a look of confusion. "I don't know," I said. "I found it on the sidewalk during my walk. Someone must have dropped it." I picked it up to use as a bookmark. She looked at the card and then at me, and she laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed off the walls. A A bookmark, she said, tossing the card back onto the pile of my belongings as if it were trash. You are pathetic. Caleb picking up garbage off the street, hoarding trash like a rat. This is exactly why you need to go to Shady Pines. You are losing it. You are turning into a scavenger. She turned on her heel and marched back to the stairs, pausing at the bottom to look back at me with pure contempt. Clean this mess up, she ordered, pointing at my scattered life on the floor, and don't you ever leave this house at night again without my permission, or I will change the locks and you can sleep on the sidewalk with your trash. She stomped up the stairs and slammed the door, locking it from the other side. I sat there in the silence listening to the lock click, and I smiled. I reached out and picked up the business card from the floor, wiping a speck of dust from the embossed letters she had held $20 million in her hand. She had held the answer to every prayer she ever had, and she threw it away because she couldn't see past her own arrogance. She thought it was junk. She thought I was junk. I picked up my jacket and checked the inside pocket. The contract was still there, safe and sound. I began to fold my clothes, putting them back in the suitcase, humming a little tune under my breath. She had 30 days to show me. She had a heart, but she had just used day one to show me she had a hole where her soul should be. I looked at the ceiling and whispered, "You should have looked closer. Ashley, you really should have looked closer." The sound of my old leather suitcase hitting the pavement was the only goodbye I got from the house I had paid for with 30 years of sweat and back-breaking labor. Ashley didn't even open the door fully. She just shoved my belongings out onto the driveway and slammed the deadbolt home with a finality that echoed in the quiet suburban street. She yelled through the wood that she was done running a charity ward and that if I was going to hoard trash like that business card, I could do it on the street. I stood there in the morning sun, looking at the closed door, feeling the weight of the Green Tech contract in my inside pocket pressing against my ribs like a steel plate. $20 million, and I was being kicked out for being a burden. $20 million, and my son was inside watching TV while his wife threw his father to the wolves. I picked up my suitcase, my bad knee protesting the movement, and I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't beg. I just walked until I found a bus stop and took the long ride down to the south side to the Starlight Motel, a place where the neon sign buzzed like an angry hornet and the sheets smelled of bleach and regret. I checked into room 104, paying cash for the week. The clerk behind the bulletproof glass didn't ask questions. He just slid the key across the counter and went back to his magazine. I sat on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, feeling a strange sense of freedom for the first time in months. I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't being watched. I was alone, and I had work to do. I reached into my boot and pulled out the burner phone, dialing the number Darnell had given me for a private investigator named Ray, a man who used to be a detective before he realized the law didn't always serve justice. Ray met me 2 hours later in the motel parking lot. He was a heavy-set man with eyes that had seen too much and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. I handed him an envelope, thick, with cash in advance from my personal savings that I had withdrawn before the banks closed. Find out everything, I told him, leaning against the rusted railing of the walkway. I want to know who Terrence owes money to. I want to know how much, and I want to know exactly where the money went, because I know my son. He is not smart enough to lose $200,000 on crypto without help. Ray took the money and nodded. He didn't ask why an old man in a cheap motel had that kind of cash. He just said, "Give me 24 hours. Mr. Jenkins, and he drove off, leaving me to wait in the silence of room 104. The next day passed slowly. I ate a sandwich from the vending machine and watched the news, seeing the headlines about the new lithium discovery in Alabama, seeing the analysts speculate about who the mystery owner could be. They were talking about me. They were talking about the old man sitting in a motel room with a hole in his sock, waiting for the axe to fall on his ungrateful family. Ray came back just as the sun was setting, casting long, orange shadows across the parking lot. He knocked on the door 3 times, a solid, rhythmic sound. I let him in, and he sat at the small round table pulling a manila folder from his jacket. "It is worse than you thought," Caleb Ray said, his voice low and gravelly. "Your boy isn't just bad at investing. He is a liar. He told everyone. He lost the money in the market crash. He told you it was bad luck. But the paper trail tells a different story." He opened the folder and spread the photos and bank statements across the table. Looking at the evidence was like taking a physical beating. There were receipts from luxury car dealerships, receipts from high-end boutiques, receipts for jewelry and 5-star hotels. He borrowed $200,000 from a loan shark named Vinny. The butcher, Ray said, pointing to a grainy photo of a man with a thick neck and cold eyes. Vinny doesn't deal in crypto, Caleb. He deals in cash and he deals in pain. Terrence borrowed the money under the guise of a business loan. He said he was starting a consulting firm, but look at the dates. I looked at the dates and my heart sank. The dates matched up perfectly with Ashley's social media posts. The new Mercedes she claimed was a lease. The designer handbags she said were knockoffs. The weekend trips to Miami she said were for work conferences. My son hadn't lost the money on a bad bet. He had spent it on her. He had borrowed money from the devil to buy trinkets for a woman who despised him, to buy the affection of a wife who was already planning to leave him for her boss. He bought her the world on credit, I whispered, touching the photo of the white Mercedes credit that came with a broken leg clause. Ray nodded grimly and the clock is ticking. Caleb. Vinny isn't a patient man. The note was due yesterday. Terrence missed the payment. Vinny gave him a 48-hour extension as a courtesy, but that courtesy expires tomorrow night if he doesn't have the $200,000 plus interest by then. Vinny is going to send his collection crew and they don't knock. I sat back in the creaky chair, feeling a mix of rage and sorrow. My son was going to get hurt. He was going to get hurt because he was trying to be a big shot, because he was trying to keep a woman who saw him as an ATM machine. I had the money. I could write a check right now and make Vinny go away. I could save him. But then I remembered the basement. I remembered the apple juice. I remembered the look on Ashley's face when she threw my dinner in the trash. I remembered them plotting to put me in a home to steal a pension that wouldn't even cover the interest on their debt if I saved him. Now he would never learn if I saved him. Now Ashley would win, she would take the money and run, and Terrence would be left with nothing but his stupidity. I thanked Ray, and he left me alone with the truth. The envelope with the Green Tech contract felt heavy in my pocket, burning against my chest like a hot coal. I had the power to stop the train, but I decided to let it ride. I decided to let them see the consequences of their greed up close. I waited the hours ticking by like water torture in the silence of the motel room. I checked my phone every 10 minutes, waiting for the call I knew was coming. Night fell, turning the sky black, and the neon sign outside buzzed louder. I pictured them in that house. My house sitting on the furniture I paid for, thinking they were safe, thinking the old man was gone and their problems were solved. It happened at 9:30 at night. My burner phone lit up on the nightstand, dancing across the wood with the vibration. I looked at the caller. ID. It was the house landline. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before I picked it up, holding it to my ear without saying a word. Dad? Oh God. Dad, help us. It was Ashley, but her voice was unrecognizable. It was high-pitched and shattered, broken by jagged sobs and the sound of pure terror. In the background I could hear crashing sounds, the sound of glass breaking, the sound of heavy boots on hardwood, the sound of wood splintering. Ashley, I said, my voice calm, cold. What is going on? They are here, Dad. They are destroying everything, she screamed, and then I heard a loud thud like a fist hitting a wall, followed by a scream from Terrence, a sound of pain that made my hand tighten on the phone. Please, Dad, you have to help us. They want money. They say Terrence owes them everything. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my own reflection in the dark window, watching the red neon light wash over my face, giving me the look of a vengeful spirit. Who is they, Ashley? I asked, feigning ignorance. The men, she sobbed. Men with bats. They are smashing the TV. They smashed the computer. They said they are going to break Terrence's legs if we don't pay. Dad, please, we know you have money. We know you have the pension check. We know you have savings hidden somewhere. Tell us where it is. Tell us so we can give it to them, even in her terror, even. With the wolves at the door, she was still trying to steal from me. She thought my meager savings, my pension, could stop a man like Vinny. She was delusional. She was so wrapped up in her own lies, she couldn't see reality. I don't have any money, Ashley, I said, my voice flat. I am just a broke old man, remember? I am a burden. I am the reason you can't buy a BMW. No. Dad, please don't say that, she wailed, and I heard another crash. Something big falling over, maybe the china cabinet. Listen to me. They are going to hurt him. They are going to hurt me. You have to have something. The farm, Dad, the farm in Alabama. You said there was gold. You said there was a box. There was no gold. Ashley, I said, reminding her of her own cruelty. Just love letters. Remember, just trash. Then I heard Terrence's voice in the background, breathless and panicked. Tell him, Dad, Tell him to call the police. Do something. I closed my eyes, listening to the destruction of the home I had built, listening to the dismantling of their false lives. I can't help you, I said softly. I am at a motel. I am miles away. And even if I were there, what could I do? I am just a senile old man. I probably wouldn't even understand what was happening. Please, Caleb, she begged, her voice dropping to a whisper of pure desperation. Save us, just save us, and I promise I will be better. I will take care of you. I looked at the green tech contract sticking out of my jacket pocket, the $20 million promise, listening to her lie. One last time she wouldn't be better. She would just be more careful. Next time I hung up the phone, cutting off her screams, cutting off the sound of my son paying for his sins. I sat there in the silence of room 104, the neon light blinking on and off like a heartbeat. I put the phone under my pillow and laid back on the bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. They wanted a reality check. Well, the bill had just arrived, and this time I wasn't picking up the tab. I closed my eyes and waited for morning, knowing that when the sun came up, the world would be a very different place for Terrence and Ashley. And for the first time in a long time, I slept like a baby. The smell of a hospital is the same everywhere. Whether you are rich or poor, it smells of antiseptic and floor wax and fear. It is a smell that sticks to the back of your throat and reminds you that the human body is just a fragile sack of bones waiting to break. I walked down the sterile white hallway of Central General, my boots squeaking on the linoleum, counting the room numbers, until I found 304. The door was open, and inside the scene looked like a tableau of misery painted by a man who had lost his faith in God. Terrence was lying in the bed, his right arm encased in a thick plaster cast, elevated in a sling. His face was a map of purple and yellow bruises, one eye swollen shut, the other staring blankly at the ceiling tiles. He looked small, broken, the arrogance beaten out of him by Vinny's collection crew. He looked like the little boy who used to come crying to me when the bigger kids took his lunch money. Only this time I couldn't go get his money back and I couldn't fix the hurt with a Band-Aid. Ashley was pacing the small room wearing wrinkled clothes that looked like she had slept in them. Her hair was a mess and her eyes were wild, darting around the room like a trapped animal. She wasn't looking at her husband with love or concern. She was looking at him with the annoyance of a woman whose car had broken down on the way to a party when she saw me standing in the doorway. She didn't look relieved. She looked desperate. She looked like a junkie seeing a dealer. Caleb, she gasped, rushing over to me, grabbing my arm with claws that dug into my denim jacket. Thank God you are here. Look at him. Just look at what they did to him. They broke his arm, Caleb, they said. Next time it will be his neck, they said. We have 24 hours to come up with something or they are coming back to the hospital. I pulled my arm away from her grip and walked over to the bed. I looked down at my son, and for a moment the anger in my chest cooled into a heavy, sad pity. He tried to look at me with his good eye. And I saw the shame there, thick and suffocating. Dad, he croaked, his voice dry and cracked. I messed up. I didn't answer him. I just looked at the cast, at the swollen jaw, at the price of his greed. Getting beaten half to death wasn't enough to pay off a $200,000 debt. Vinny wanted his money, and he was going to keep breaking things until he got it. Ashley stepped between us, blocking my view of my son, making sure she was the center of attention again. Listen to me, Caleb. We are out of options. We are completely tapped out. They took the electronics, they took the jewelry, they took everything, and it barely covered the interest. But you have something. You have that land in Alabama. I looked at her, keeping my face blank, playing the part of the confused old man. The land, I asked slowly. You mean the old farm? Yes, the farm, she snapped, her patience fraying like a cheap rope. I know you said it was a ruin. I know you said it was worthless, but land is land, Caleb. Someone will buy it. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a developer, maybe just some hick who wants to park a trailer on it. Even if we only get $5,000, even if we get $2,000, it is cash. It is something we can give Vinny to buy more time. You have to sell it, Caleb. You have to call that lawyer friend of yours right now and tell him to dump it for whatever he can get. She was pleading now, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears for Terrence's pain. They were tears for her own lifestyle. She was bargaining with my inheritance, trying to sell my father's legacy for pennies just to keep the wolves away for one more day. She didn't know that the land she was trying to sell for a few $1,000s was worth $20 million. She didn't know. I had the contract in my pocket right now, pressing against my chest like a shield. I looked at her frantic face, and I decided it was time to twist the knife. Time to see exactly how much she loved my son. when the money was truly gone. I can't. "Sell it, Ashley," I said, my voice quiet and sad. "What do you mean you can't sell it?" she shrieked, her voice rising to a pitch that made the nurse in the hallway look in. "You are the owner. You can do whatever you want. Just sign the deed over." I shook my head slowly, looking down at my boots, shuffling my feet. "I already sold it," I said. The room went silent, dead silent. Even the beeping of the heart monitor seemed to pause. Terrence tried to sit up, wincing in pain, looking at me with wide eyes. Ashley froze, her mouth hanging open, her brain trying to process what I had just said. "You sold it," she whispered, hope flaring in her eyes like a match in a dark room. When did you sell it? How much did you get? Where is the money?" "Caleb, do you have it? Is it in the suitcase?" I sighed, a long, rattling sound of an old man who has made a mistake. "I sold it yesterday morning," I said, lying through my teeth, giving the performance of a lifetime. "I was at the diner and I met a man, a nice man. He said he wanted to expand his hog farm. He offered to take it off my hands right there. Cash on the barrelhead, I thought. Since you said it was trash, since you said it was worthless, I should just get rid of it so I wouldn't be a burden anymore with the taxes." Ashley was shaking now, her hands trembling, reaching out as if to grab the money from the air. "How much?" "Caleb," she demanded, her voice tight and greedy. "How much did he give you?" 10,020. I reached into my pocket, my hand moving slow, agonizingly slow, and I pulled out a crumpled bill. I smoothed it out on the bedside table next to Terrence's water pitcher. It was a single $50 bill. "He gave me $50, I said, looking at them with innocent eyes. "He said it was a fair price for a pile of rocks and weeds, and since I needed money for the motel room, I took it. I have 40 left. I spent 10 on lunch. $50. Ashley stared at the bill sitting on the white table, her eyes bulging, her face turning a shade of purple that looked dangerous. She looked at the bill, then at me, then at Terrence, and then something inside her snapped. It wasn't a slow break, it was an explosion, a violent shattering of the last shred of her composure. $50, she screamed, the sound tearing her throat raw. "You sold 3 farms for $50, you stupid, senile, useless old man. You gave away our only lifeline for the price of a tank of gas. Are you kidding me? Tell me you are kidding me." I shook my head, backing away, feigning fear. "I thought it was a good deal," I mumbled. "Nobody wanted it." "Ashley, you said so yourself." She let out a guttural roar of frustration and spun around facing Terrence, who was lying there, helpless and terrified. She didn't hug him, she didn't comfort him. She raised her hand and she slapped him hard right across his bruised face. The sound of her palm hitting his damaged skin echoed in the small room, a sickening wet smack. "This is your fault," she screamed, standing over him like a fury, her face twisted into a mask of pure ugliness. "You and your stupid father and your stupid family. I told you he was useless. I told you we should have put him in a home years ago, but no, you wanted to play the good son. Well, look where it got us, Terrence. Look at us. We are going to die because your father sold our future for $50. Terrence didn't defend himself. He just let his head roll to the side, tears leaking from his eyes, mixing with the fresh blood on his lip. Ashley wasn't done. She was pacing the room, kicking the chair, throwing her purse against the wall, unraveling completely. "I should have never married you," she yelled, her voice echoing in the corridor. "I knew it. I knew you were a loser the moment I met you, pretending to be a big shot with your leased car and your fake watch. I should have married Mike. I should have married him. He owns the garage. He has real money. He has a boat. He asked me, Terrence, he asked me to leave you 6 months ago, and I said no because I thought you were going to cash out on the crypto. I thought your dad had land. I was betting on the wrong horse." She was panting, heaving, looking at him with pure disgust, telling him to his face that she had a backup plan, that she had regretted him for months, that she was only with him for a payout that never came. I stood in the corner, my hand in my pocket, my fingers wrapped around my phone, the voice recorder app running silently, capturing every word, every scream, every admission of guilt, capturing the sound of the slap and the confession of her infidelity, capturing the proof that she was exactly who I thought she was. Terrence looked at her, his good eye wide with shock. The physical pain of his broken arm forgotten, replaced by the agony of his broken heart. "Mike," he whispered. "Mike the mechanic? The guy who fixed my truck?" "Yes. Mike," she spat at him. "A real man. A man who can pay his bills. A man who doesn't have a senile father dragging him down to hell." I am done, Terrence. Do you hear me? I am done. I am not waiting for Vinny to come back and break my legs. I am leaving. She grabbed her purse from the floor, checking her reflection in the mirror, wiping the sweat from her upper lip, composing herself as if she hadn't just destroyed a man in a hospital bed. I am going to my mother's, she said coldly, adjusting her dress, fixing her hair. And don't call me, don't text me unless you find a way to fix this. Unless you find real money. Don't you dare contact me. You deal with your father. You deal with the debt. I am out. She turned and marched out of the room, her heels clicking on the linoleum, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and devastation in her wake. She didn't look at me. She didn't look back at her husband. She just walked out, saving herself. Leaving the sinking ship, I stood there in the silence, the recording still running on my phone, capturing the sound of my son sobbing, the sound of a man realizing that his life was a lie based on a transaction that had just bounced. I looked at the $50 bill on the table, the bait that had caught the rat, and I felt a cold satisfaction. I had the truth. Now I had it all on tape, and I knew that when the time was right, I would play it back for the world to hear. But for now, I just looked at my son, and I didn't move to comfort him because he needed to feel this. He needed to burn so he could maybe rise from the ashes. I sat in the motel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper, listening to the sirens wail in the distance and wondering how much longer I could keep this game going before someone got hurt worse than Terrence. My son was in a hospital bed with a broken wing, and his wife was out there somewhere probably plotting her next move or maybe just looking for a new victim. But I underestimated Ashley. I underestimated just how sharp her ears were when it came to the sound of money. It was a Tuesday morning, 2 days after the hospital incident, when I heard a knock on the motel door, not the heavy pound of a bill collector or the rhythmic knock of Ray the investigator, but a soft, tentative tapping, like a neighbor coming to borrow sugar. I pulled myself off the bed, my joints popping like firecrackers, and limped to the peephole, expecting to see the maid, or maybe the manager telling me my week was up. It was Ashley. But it wasn't the Ashley I had left screaming in the hospital corridor. This was a different woman entirely. She was wearing a modest dress. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. She looked humble. She looked contrite. She looked like a grieving daughter trying to make amends. She was holding a plastic bag from the pharmacy and a takeout cup of coffee, my brand. She knocked again, gently, calling out, "Caleb, are you in there? Please, open up. I just want to talk." I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door, leaving the chain on, peering out at her through the crack. I asked, "What do you want, Ashley? I don't have any money left, remember?" She looked down at her shoes and sniffled, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. "I know, Caleb. I know, and I am so sorry about everything. The hospital, the way I spoke to you, the way I treated you. I was just so scared for Terrence. I wasn't thinking straight. I haven't slept in days, worrying about him and worrying about you sitting here in this awful place. It isn't right, Caleb. You are family, and family belongs at home." I studied her face, looking for the cracks in the mask, looking for the snake underneath the skin. But she was good. She was Academy Award good. If I didn't know better, I would have believed her, but I knew better. I knew she was a viper who had just tried to sell my father's land for pennies. So why was she here? Why the sudden change of heart? Unless she knew, unless she had found out, I unhooked the chain and opened the door, stepping back to let her in. She walked into the dingy room and looked around with a sad shake of her head. "Oh, Dad," she whispered. "This is terrible. You can't stay here. It smells like smoke and mildew. Pack your things. I am taking you home. I cleaned up the basement. I put fresh sheets on the cot. I even bought you those soft pillows you like." I watched her moving around the room, gathering my few belongings, touching my old shirts with a tenderness that made my skin crawl. I said, "Ashley, why are you doing this yesterday? You wished I was dead." She stopped and turned to me, her eyes wide and innocent. I was angry, Caleb. Anger makes us say terrible things, but I had a wake-up call. I was sitting in the hospital waiting room this morning, waiting to see Terrence. And the news was on the TV in the corner. They were talking about Alabama, about some big energy discovery down there, something about lithium and batteries and billions of dollars. My heart skipped a beat. I kept my face stone cold, playing the part of the confused old man. "Lithium?" I asked. "What is that?" She watched me closely, her eyes narrowing, just a fraction, searching for a tell, searching for a lie. She said, "It is a metal. Caleb, very valuable. They said there is a massive deposit in the same county where your father's farm is. They said land prices are skyrocketing, that investors are paying millions for acres that used to be worthless cotton fields. Isn't that a coincidence? Dad, isn't it funny that you sold the farm for $50 right before the news broke? I shrugged, forcing my shoulders to slump, forcing a look of regret onto my face. Well, that is just my luck, isn't it? Always a day late and a dollar short story of my life. I guess the guy at the diner got the deal of the century. Ashley stared at me for a long, uncomfortable silence, dissecting my performance, looking for the gold beneath the gray, and then she smiled. It wasn't the warm smile from before, and it wasn't the sneer. It was something new, something terrifyingly calm. She said, "Well, what is done is done. We can't cry over spilled milk, right? The important thing is that we have each other. Come on, let's get you home. I am going to make us a nice dinner tonight. I am going to make your favorite chicken soup with the dumplings, just like your mother used to make." I let her drive me back to the house, sitting in the passenger seat of her SUV. Watching her out of the corner of my eye, she was humming to herself, tapping her fingers on the wheel, not with anxiety, but with anticipation. She wasn't taking me home because she felt guilty. She was taking me home because she suspected I was lying, she suspected I hadn't sold the land, she suspected I was sitting on a winning lottery ticket, and she was going to get it out of me one way or another. We got to the house and it was quiet. Terrence was still in the hospital recovering from his beating and his surgery. So it was just me and Ashley in the empty, echoing rooms. She led me down to the basement, and true to her word, she had cleaned it up. The air freshener was working overtime, masking the damp smell, and there were new pillows on the cot. She helped me unpack, acting the perfect nurse, the perfect daughter-in-law. "You rest down here, Dad," she said, patting my arm. "I am going to go start the soup. It needs to simmer for a long time to get the flavor right. You just relax. I will call you when it is ready." I waited until I heard her footsteps fade into the kitchen above, and then I pulled the burner phone from my pocket, checking for messages Darnell had texted. "The ink is dry. Caleb, the trust is set up. You are officially invisible for 29 more days. Stay safe." I deleted the message and hid the phone back in my boot. I sat there in the silence, listening to the sounds of cooking coming from upstairs, the chopping, the sizzling, the running water. It sounded domestic, it sounded safe, but my gut was screaming at me. My gut was telling me that I was the chicken in the pot. Hours passed, the sun went down and the basement grew dark. I didn't turn on the light. I just sat there waiting, feeling the tension build like static electricity in the air. Finally, the door opened and Ashley called down, "Dad, dinner is ready. Come on up while it is hot." I walked up the stairs slowly, my stomach growling despite my fear I hadn't eaten since the vending machine sandwich yesterday, and the smell wafting from the kitchen was incredible, rich and savory. It smelled like home. I walked into the kitchen and Ashley was standing by the stove wearing an apron holding a ladle. She smiled at me, and it was almost genuine, almost. "Sit down, Caleb," she said, gesturing to the table where a single place was set, a steaming bowl of soup waiting in the center. "I made it just for you. I already ate mine while I was cooking. I was starving. Sit, eat." I sat down looking at the bowl. The broth was golden. The dumplings were fluffy. The carrots were perfectly diced. It looked like love in a bowl. But then I looked at Ashley. She was leaning against the counter watching me, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on my spoon. She wasn't blinking. She was waiting. She was too eager. "It looks delicious, Ashley," I said, picking up the spoon, my hand trembling slightly, just enough to sell the old man act. "Thank you for this." "Eat up," she urged, her voice tight. "It will make you feel better. It will help you sleep. You look so tired, Dad. You need a good long sleep." Sleep. The word hung in the air, heavy with double meaning. I lifted the spoon to my lips, blowing on the hot liquid, the steam rising up into my face. I smelled the chicken. I smelled the herbs, but underneath it all there was something else. A faint chemical scent, something bitter masked by the heavy seasoning. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was my paranoia, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't put it in my mouth. I lowered the spoon, sighing loudly. "You know what I said? I forgot to take my stomach pill. I can't eat spicy food without it. Let me just go grab it from my jacket." Ashley frowned, her impatience flaring just for a second before she smoothed it over. "Don't worry about it, Caleb. It isn't spicy. Just eat it before it gets cold." "I need the pill, Ashley. I insist." I stood up, leaving the full bowl on the table. "I will be right back." I walked toward the back door, toward the jacket I had hung on the hook by the porch entrance. but instead of grabbing the pill, I opened the back door, stepping out into the cool night air. "I need some fresh air," I called out. "I feel a bit dizzy." Ashley followed me to the door, standing in the frame, watching me like a hawk. "Where are you going, Caleb? Come back inside and eat." I walked over to the edge of the porch where a stray cat, a mangy orange tabby that prowled the neighborhood, was sitting on the railing, watching me with hungry yellow eyes. I had fed this cat scraps before. Much to Ashley's annoyance, she hated the thing, called it vermin. "Here, kitty," I whispered, reaching into my pocket, pretending to look for my pill. But actually grabbing a napkin from the patio table, I walked back to the kitchen door and grabbed the bowl of soup before Ashley could stop me. I said, "I am just going to let it cool down out here. It is too hot inside." "What are you doing, Caleb?" Ashley snapped, stepping onto the porch. "Bring that bowl back inside right now." I ignored her. I walked to the edge of the railing and set the bowl down. The cat smelled the meat and hopped down, mewling, rubbing against my hand. "Poor thing is hungry," I mumbled, putting on the senile act again. "I will just give him a little bit, just a taste." "No!" Ashley screamed, lunging for me. "Don't feed that filthy animal." But she was. Too late. The cat had already lapped up a mouthful of the broth, purring as it swallowed. I watched the cat waiting, counting the seconds. Ashley froze, her hand outstretched, her eyes wide with panic. She wasn't worried about the cat. She was worried about the evidence. The cat licked its chops, looking for more, and then suddenly it stopped. The purring cut off, abruptly replaced by a low guttural growl. The cat stumbled, its legs giving out under it. It fell onto its side on the wooden deck, twitching violently, its paws scrabbling against the wood as if it were running from a demon. Foam started to bubble at the corners of its mouth, white and frothy. I stared at the dying animal, my heart turning to ice in my chest. It wasn't a mild sedative, it wasn't a sleeping pill. That cat was convulsing. That cat was dying right in front of me. She hadn't just tried to knock me out. She had tried to kill me. She had put enough poison in that bowl to stop a heart that was already tired. Ashley stood there staring at the cat, her face pale in the porch light. She didn't say a word. She didn't try to help the animal. She just looked at me, and in her eyes I didn't see regret. I saw calculation. She was wondering if I knew. She was wondering if she could spin this. I looked at her, the woman who had married my son, the woman who had smiled and told me she made this just for me. I picked up the bowl, my hand steady, now steady with the weight of the truth, and I walked over to her prize-potted plant, a large, expensive fern she kept by the door, the one she watered with bottled water, the one she loved more than she loved me. I didn't say a word. I just poured the soup into the soil, the golden broth soaking into the dirt, the dumplings tumbling out like stones. I emptied the bowl right in front of her, watching the liquid disappear into the roots. What was in the soup? "Ashley," I asked, my voice low and dangerous, "what did you put in there to help me sleep?" She took a step back, stumbling over the doormat. "It was just herbs." She stammered, "Ancient herbs my mother sent me for relaxation." "That cat was sick. It was already sick. Caleb, you know it was." I looked at the cat, which had stopped moving, its eyes glassy and staring at nothing. I looked at the plant, and even in the dim light I could see the leaves starting to droop, the poison working fast, working its way through the veins of the fern, killing it from the inside out. "I know what I see," I said. "I see a dead cat, and I see a dying plant, and I see a daughter-in-law who just tried to murder her husband's father." "You are crazy," she hissed, regaining her composure, her survival instinct kicking in. "Nobody will believe you. You are a confused old man who feeds stray cats. You probably poisoned it yourself. You are trying to frame me because you hate me." She turned and ran back inside, slamming the door and locking it, leaving me on the porch with the dead cat and the empty bowl. I stood there for a long time, listening to the lock click, listening to the silence of the night. I knew then that the game had changed. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about teaching them a lesson. It was about staying alive. She had crossed the line from greed to murder, and if I stayed in that house one more night, I wouldn't wake up in the morning. I looked at the plant, the leaves now fully wilted, turning brown and crispy under the toxic assault. I touched a leaf, and it crumbled to dust in my fingers, just like my family, just like the love I thought we had. I picked up my jacket from the hook, feeling the contract still safe in the pocket, and I walked off the porch, leaving the bowl, leaving the house, leaving the life I had known. I walked into the darkness, knowing that I was being hunted, knowing that my own family was the predator, but they didn't know that the prey had teeth, and the prey was about to bite back hard. I sat in the small office of Darnell's law firm watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of afternoon sunlight that cut through the blinds, trying to keep my hands from shaking as I read the document that had been served to me that morning. It was a petition for emergency guardianship filed by my son, Terrence Jenkins, and his wife, Ashley, claiming that I, Caleb Jenkins, was suffering from acute dementia and was in immediate danger to myself and my estate. The audacity of it took my breath away, even after everything they had done, even after the poisoned soup and the attempted murder. They were now trying to kill me legally. They were trying to erase my existence as a competent human being so they could wrap their greedy fingers around a fortune they didn't even know the full extent of. Yet, Darnell slammed his hand on the mahogany desk, making me jump. He was furious, the kind of quiet, simmering fury that a good lawyer gets when he sees the law being twisted into a weapon. Caleb, this is garbage. Absolute garbage. Look at the signature on the medical affidavit, Dr. Eris Thorne. I know this guy. He is a pill mill doctor. He lost his license in Georgia for signing prescriptions for dead people, and now he is practicing out of a strip mall clinic in the bad part of town. Ashley didn't take you to see him. Did she? I shook my head, feeling the weight of the betrayal settling in my gut. No. Darnell, I have never met this man in my life. She must have paid him. She must have taken that money she stole from my credit cards and bought a diagnosis, just like she buys her shoes. We have to fight this, Caleb. Darnell said, pacing the room, his tie loosened. We have to fight fire with fire. I want you to go to the University Medical Center right now. I have a friend there, Dr. Patel. She is the head of neurology. I want you to get a full workup, a cognitive assessment, a psychiatric evaluation, a brain scan. I want irrefutable proof that your mind is as sharp as a razor blade. We are going to walk into that courtroom with science on our side, and we are going to shove it down their throats. I did exactly what he said. I spent the next 6 hours in the sterile white halls of the hospital answering questions, solving puzzles, and letting machines scan the inside of my skull. It was humiliating in a way, having to prove I was sane, having to prove I knew what year it was and who the president was just because my family wanted to steal my life. But I did it. I sat there with my back straight and my voice steady, and I passed every test with flying colors. Dr. Patel handed me the report herself, a thick packet of papers that certified I was not only competent but operating with a cognitive function above average for my age. I took that report back to Darnell's office and I placed it on his desk next to the fake affidavit. And then I did the hardest thing I have ever had to do in my life. I looked Darnell in the eye and I said, "Draw up a new will." Darnell looked at me, his pen hovering over the legal pad. Are you sure? Caleb. Once we file this, it becomes public record. If you die... I cut him off, my voice cold and dead. If I die. Darnell, I want there to be no mistake. I want Terrence to know exactly what he is worth to me. Write it down. I leave to my son. Terrence Jenkins, the sum of $1, one single dollar, so that he cannot claim he was forgotten. He was remembered, and he was measured, and he was found wanting everything else. Every acre of land, every ounce of lithium, every share of stock goes to the foundation. We talked about to build schools and clinics for people who actually deserve a chance. I signed the paper, and I felt a piece of my heart wither and die. Signing that will was like burying my son while he was still alive, but he had made his choice. He had chosen the poison over the father. The court date for the emergency hearing was set for 2 days later. A rush job that Darnell said smelled of influence peddling. We walked into the county courthouse, a building made of gray stone that looked like a fortress. And there, they were sitting at the plaintiff's table. Ashley was wearing a black dress and a veil, a literal veil, as if she were already mourning me, dabbling at dry eyes with a tissue. Terrence sat next to her, looking like a man walking to the gallows, pale and sweating, refusing to meet my gaze. We stood when the bailiff announced the judge, and my heart sank when I saw who walked in. It was Judge Clayton Holloway, a man with a reputation for favoring the country club set. A man I had seen shaking hands with Ashley's boss at a charity gala months ago. He looked at Ashley and gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of recognition before settling his gaze on me with cold indifference. The hearing began, and Ashley's lawyer, a slick man with a suit that cost more than my truck, stood up and painted a picture of a tragic decline. He talked about my wandering at night, about my confusion, about the incident with the ink bottle and the apple juice. He painted me as a danger, a man losing his grip on reality, who needed the loving guidance of his family to protect his assets. Then it was Darnell's turn. He stood up and presented the report from University Hospital, slapping it down on the bench. Your Honor, my client has been evaluated by the top neurologist in the state. This affidavit from the plaintiff is signed by a doctor with a criminal record, while our evidence comes from a teaching hospital. Mr. Jenkins is competent, sane, and fully capable of managing his own affairs. This petition is nothing more than a grab for assets by a desperate and indebted couple. Judge Holloway barely glanced at the report. He flipped through the pages dismissively and looked at Ashley. Mrs. Jenkins, do you have anything else to add? Anything that speaks to the immediate danger your father-in-law poses? Ashley stood up and walked to the witness stand, her heels clicking on the wood. She looked at the judge with big, watery eyes and said, Your Honor, it breaks my heart to say this, but the medical report doesn't show everything. Caleb has been hallucinating. He talks to people who aren't there specifically. He talks to his dead father, Silas Jenkins. We have proof. My blood ran cold. Proof. What proof? Ashley pulled a USB drive from her purse and handed it to the bailiff, who plugged it into the court's computer system. A video projected onto the large screen on the wall. The video was grainy, taken from a hidden camera, probably one of the nanny cams she had installed to spy on me. It showed me in the living room 3 nights ago, standing in front of the fireplace wearing my best suit, looking into the mirror, practicing. I remembered that night I was practicing the speech I was going to give at the press conference, the speech announcing the green tech deal, announcing the foundation. I was rehearsing the words I wanted to say to the world, and yes, in my emotion, in the privacy of what I thought was my safe space, I had spoken to my father. On the screen, my image spoke, voice clear and strong. Silas, we did it, Pop. We finally did it. They thought the land was worthless, but you knew, you old fox. You knew it was a gold mine. I am going to build the school. Pop, I am going to make the name Jenkins mean something. Again, we beat them. The video cut off and the courtroom was silent. Ashley looked at the judge, a tear sliding down her cheek. You see, Your Honor, he thinks he is talking to a ghost. He thinks he has a gold mine. He thinks he is building schools. He is living in a fantasy world. And if we don't step in, he is going to spend every penny he has on these delusions. He is going to leave himself destitute. It was a trap, a perfect twisted trap. She had taken my moment of triumph, my moment of connection with my heritage, and twisted it into evidence of insanity. She didn't know about the lithium. She didn't know the gold mine was real. She just thought it was the ramblings of a crazy man. And to an outsider, to a judge who didn't know the truth, it looked exactly like that. Darnell jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. My client was rehearsing a speech for a business venture. This is taken out of context. Judge Holloway held up a hand, silencing him. Mr. Washington, I have seen enough. This video clearly demonstrates a detachment from reality. Talking to dead relatives about gold mines is a textbook sign of dementia, coupled with the financial instability testified to by the family. I am inclined to grant the motion. No, I shouted, standing up, forgetting my place, forgetting the protocol. You can't do this. I am not crazy. The mine is real. The lithium is real. Ask Green Tech. Ask them about the contract. The judge looked at me over his glasses, his eyes filled with pity and condescension. Sit down. Mr. Jenkins, this outburst only confirms my concerns. He banged his gavel, a sound that echoed like a gunshot, ending my life order in the court, based on the evidence presented and the apparent immediate risk to the estate. I am issuing a temporary guardianship order to Terrence and Ashley Jenkins pending a full investigation. Furthermore, I am freezing all assets, accounts, and properties belonging to Caleb Jenkins effective immediately until a court-appointed auditor can review the estate to prevent further dissipation. Frozen. My assets were frozen. The $20 million, the pension, the savings, everything. I was locked out. I was powerless. Ashley let out a sob of relief, collapsing into Terrence's arms, but I saw the smile hidden behind her handkerchief, a smile of pure victory. She had done it. She had used the law to steal my life. The bailiff moved toward me, his hand on his belt. Mr. Jenkins, you need to go with your family now. I looked at Darnell, who was frantically packing his briefcase, whispering that we would appeal, that we would fix this. But I knew the game was rigged. I looked at Ashley and Terrence, who were standing up, looking at me like they owned me, because now, legally they did. Ashley walked over to me, her eyes shining with malice. She leaned in close, so only I could hear, and whispered time to go home. "Dad, we have a room waiting for you at Shady Pines. The van is coming in an hour." I stood there feeling the walls closing in, feeling the trap snap shut. I was a prisoner again, stripped of my rights, stripped of my money, stripped of my voice. But as I looked at her gloating face, I remembered the one thing the judge hadn't frozen. The one thing she hadn't found. I remembered the contract in my boot and the 30-day clause. The countdown was still ticking. And even though they had me in chains, they didn't know they were chained to a bomb, and I was the only one who knew when it was going to explode. I let them lead me out of the courtroom, my head bowed, playing the defeated old man. But inside my mind was racing, planning, calculating, because the war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield, and I was ready to burn it all down. The house I built with my own hands had become a cage, the court order hanging over my head like a guillotine blade, trapping me within the four walls of my own property, under the watchful eye of the woman who wanted me dead. I was a prisoner in the master bedroom, the room where my wife Beatrice had taken her last breath. A room that used to be a sanctuary, but was now a holding cell, waiting for the transport van to Shady Pines. Ashley had stripped it bare, taking away the phone, taking away my wallet, taking away even the old radio. I used to listen to the ball games on. She said it was for my own protection. She said I was a danger to myself, but I knew the truth. She was isolating me, cutting the lines so I couldn't scream while she bled me dry. I sat by the window looking out at the neighborhood I had lived in for 40 years, watching the world go by, indifferent to the old man, locked behind the glass. The judge had signed the paper giving them temporary guardianship, which meant I couldn't leave. I couldn't drive, and I couldn't spend a dime of my own money without their permission. I was legally a child, a ward of the state in the custody of wolves. Ashley had installed a keypad lock on the bedroom door, punching in a code every time she brought me a tray of tasteless food, smiling that shark smile and telling me to eat up because I needed my strength for the transition. Transition, that was her code word for disposal. She was packing my life into boxes downstairs, whistling while she worked, celebrating her victory. But she didn't know about the fire burning in my gut. She didn't know that you can lock a man up, but you can't lock up his will. I spent the first day pacing the room, testing the windows, checking the hinges, looking for a weakness, but the house was solid, built by a man who knew how to build things to last. I cursed my own craftsmanship. I cursed the sturdy oak frames and the double-pane glass. By the second day, the silence was driving me mad. I needed a lifeline. I needed to talk. To Darnell. I needed to call Sterling at Green Tech. The 30 days were almost up. The deal was about to go public, and if I wasn't there to sign the final closing documents, the whole thing would fall apart. The millions would vanish, and Ashley would win. I needed a phone, but Ashley had searched me thoroughly. She had even checked my boots. She found the burner phone I had hidden under the mattress and smashed it with a hammer, laughing as the plastic shattered. I was desperate. I was standing at the window, pressing my hand against the glass when I saw her. Mrs. Odessa moving through her garden next door like a battleship in a floral dress. She was 70 years old, with skin the color of deep mahogany and a spirit that was harder than iron. She was pruning her rose bushes, snipping the dead heads with a pair of shears, talking to herself, or maybe to God. She had been my neighbor for 3 decades, a woman who brought over sweet potato pie when Beatrice died and who had never once been afraid to speak her mind. Ashley hated her, called her the nosy old hag, called her a ghetto relic who brought down the property value. She had built a 6-foot privacy fence between our yards just to keep Odessa out of sight. But she didn't know that fences have gaps and neighbors have ears. I knew Odessa had been watching. I knew she had seen the police. I knew she had seen the ambulance. She knew something was wrong. I opened the window, just a crack, the safety latch stopping it from going further, but it was enough to let my voice carry on the wind. "Odessa," I whispered, praying she would hear me. "Odessa, look up." She paused, her shears freezing in midair. She didn't look around wildly. She tilted her head, her ears sharp as a fox, listening. She turned slowly and looked up at the second-story window, her eyes narrowing behind her. Thick glasses, she saw me, a face in the shadows, a prisoner signaling for help. "Mr. Caleb," she called out, her voice low but carrying strength. "Is that you? Why are you whispering?" "Child, I am locked in Odessa," I said, my voice trembling with the shame of it. "They got a court order. They say I am crazy. They took my phone. They are sending me away tomorrow. You have to help me." Odessa didn't gasp. She didn't ask stupid questions. She just set her jaw and nodded. She had seen enough trouble in her life to recognize it when it stared her in the face. She walked over to the fence, the tall wooden barrier Ashley had erected, and she looked around, scanning the street for Ashley's car, scanning the windows for movement. "What do you need?" "Caleb," she asked, getting straight to the point. "I need a phone," I said. "I need to make one call, just one call to save my life." She looked at me, and then she looked down at the deep pockets of her gardening apron. She reached in and pulled out a phone. Not a smartphone, not a sleek piece of glass, but an old sturdy flip phone. A brick that looked like it could survive a war. She looked at it, and then she looked at the distance between the fence and my window. It was a long throw, too long for a woman of 70. "I can't throw it that high," she whispered. "I will put it in the bucket." The bucket. I had forgotten about the bucket years ago. Terrence and the neighbor kids had rigged up a pulley system between our houses, a rope with a plastic bucket to send toys back and forth. The rope was still there, weathered and gray, tied to the trellis on my balcony and the old oak tree in her yard. It was a relic of a happier time, a ghost of childhood play. Odessa walked over to the tree and untied the rope. Lowering the faded yellow bucket, she placed the phone inside, wrapping it in her gardening gloves to cushion the blow. She tugged on the line, signaling me. "Pull it up, Caleb," she hissed. "Pull it up before the witch comes back." I reached out through the crack in the window, my fingers straining to grab the rope that was tied to the balcony railing. I managed to hook it with a wire coat hanger. I had untwisted, fishing for my freedom. I snagged the loop and pulled slowly, steadily, hand over hand, feeling the weight of the bucket rising, lifting hope from the ground below. The pulley squeaked a tiny sound that seemed deafening in the quiet afternoon. I prayed Ashley didn't hear it. I prayed she was too busy counting her imaginary money downstairs. The bucket reached the railing and I grabbed it, my hands shaking. I pulled out the phone, flipping it open, the screen glowing green with life. It had a signal. It had power. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Thank you, Odessa," I whispered, leaning my forehead against the glass. "I will never forget this. You just give 'em hell." "Caleb," she said, picking up her shears, going back to her roses as if nothing had happened. "Just give 'em hell." I dialed Sterling's number, my fingers fumbling over the small rubber buttons. It rang once, twice, and then he picked up, his voice tight and anxious. "Mr. Jenkins, where have you been? We have been trying to reach you for 48 hours. The board is going crazy. The press release is drafted. The governor is flying in tomorrow for the announcement. We need you here, Caleb. We need the final signature on the disclosure forms or the deal is dead." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Listen to me, Sterling," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I am compromised. My family has trapped me. They have a court order freezing my assets, and they are shipping me to a nursing home tomorrow morning. I can't walk out the front door." There was a silence on the line, a heavy, stunned silence. Then Sterling spoke, his voice hard, losing the corporate polish and revealing the fighter underneath. "Where are you, Caleb? Give me the address. We will send security. We will send lawyers." "No," I said, cutting him off. "If you send lawyers, now it will get tied up in court for months. Ashley has a judge in her pocket. She has fake medical records proving I am incompetent. If this becomes a legal battle, the deal will die on the vine. I have to be there voluntarily. I have to show the world I am sane and free. I have to sign that paper in front of the cameras." "Then how do you plan to get here?" Sterling asked. "I am coming to you," I said. "I am breaking out. I will be at the Green Tech headquarters tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You have the press there, you have the governor there, you make sure the cameras are rolling. I am going to walk in there and I am going to end this." I hung up the phone and hid it in my sock just as I heard the keypad beep on the bedroom door. I threw myself onto the bed, pretending to be asleep as Ashley walked in carrying a basket of laundry. She looked at me with a sneer, dropping the basket on the chair. "Get up, old man," she said. "We need to get these clothes washed for your trip tomorrow. Want you looking nice for your new roommates. Wouldn't want them to know you are a millionaire, right?" She laughed a cruel cackle at her own joke and walked out, locking the door behind her. She thought she was funny. She thought she had won, but she didn't know the train was coming. Night fell, turning the room into a box of shadows. I waited until the house was silent, until the only sound was the wind in the eaves and the beating of my own heart. I looked at the window. The only way out was down. It was a 20-foot drop to the garden below, a straight fall onto hard earth for a man of 75 with a bad knee and a bad back. It was suicide, but staying here was death. I opened the window fully, pushing it up until it locked. I looked down into the darkness. The ground looked miles away. I remembered 55 years ago, the night I snuck out of my father's house to join the army. Silas had told me I was too weak to be a soldier, that I was needed on the farm, but I knew I had to leave. I had climbed out of the hayloft that night, jumping into the unknown, terrified and exhilarated, running toward a future that was mine to choose. I felt that same fire now, that same reckless need for freedom. I stripped the bed, tying the sheets together, knotting them tight, testing the strength with my weight. It wasn't enough. It wouldn't reach the ground, but it would get me halfway. I tied one end to the heavy radiator pipe under the window and threw the other end out into the night, watching it dangle in the moonlight. I climbed onto the sill, my bad leg trembling, my heart pounding in my throat. I was an old man. I was tired. I was broken, but I wasn't beaten. Not yet. I grabbed the sheet, wrapping it around my hands, and I swung out into the void. The strain on my arms was immediate, a tearing pain in my shoulders as my weight pulled me down. I slid down the fabric, the rough cotton burning my palms, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I reached the end of the sheet and looked down. I was still 10 feet up, 10 feet of nothing between me and the ground. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the pain. I just let go. I fell through the darkness, the wind rushing past my ears, and I hit the ground hard, rolling instinctively, just like they taught us in basic training. But the impact was brutal. My bad knee buckled with a sickening pop, and a bolt of white-hot agony shot up my leg, blinding me for a second. I lay there in the dirt, gasping, biting my tongue to keep from screaming, tasting copper and bile. I lay in the shadow of the house, waiting for the lights to come on, waiting for Ashley to come screaming out onto the balcony. But the house stayed dark. They were asleep, dreaming of my money while I lay in the mud, broken, but free. I dragged myself up, gritting my teeth against the pain, forcing my leg to hold my weight. I limped toward the back gate, toward the alleyway where I knew I could disappear. I looked back at the house one last time, at the window where the sheet swayed gently in the breeze, a white flag of surrender that was actually a declaration of war. I hobbled into the night, moving slow but moving steady, every step a victory, every breath a defiance. I was Caleb Jenkins. I was a soldier. I was a father. I was a survivor. And as I disappeared into the shadows, heading toward the main road to flag down a ride, I knew that tomorrow wasn't just going to be a press conference, it was going to be a reckoning. I dragged myself into the shadows of the alleyway, my breath coming in ragged gasps that tasted of copper and old dust. My left knee was on fire, a throbbing pulse of agony that shot straight up to my hip every time I put weight on it. I leaned against the brick wall of a closed bakery, the smell of rising dough mocking my empty stomach, and I slid down until I was sitting on the cold pavement, clutching my leg, trying to keep from screaming. I was 75 years old. I had just jumped out of a second-story window, and I was a fugitive in the city I had helped build. I reached into my sock and pulled out the flip phone. Odessa had risked her safety to give me. The battery bar was low, blinking red like a warning sign. I had one call left, one chance to change the ending of this story before the ink dried on my tragedy. I looked at the screen, the green glow illuminating my dirty face, and I knew who I had to call. Not Darnell, not Sterling, not the police. I had to call the boy who broke my heart. Because I was a father, and a father never stops trying to save his son. Even when his son is holding the match, I dialed Terrence's cell number. My fingers shaking so bad I misdialed the first time and had to start over. I pressed send and held the plastic brick to my ear, listening to the ringtone, listening to the sound of my last hope connecting. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy and confused. "Hello, who is this?" "It is me, son," I whispered, my voice rough. "Don't hang up, Terrence. Do not hang up." "Dad." There was a pause, a silence filled with fear and maybe just a hint of relief. "Dad, where are you?" "Ashley is going crazy. She called the police. She said you ran away. She said, you are dangerous." "I am not dangerous, Terrence. I am desperate. Listen to me, boy. Listen to your father for once in your life. I am giving you a lifeline. I am throwing you a rope while you are drowning in that woman's lies. I need you to meet me. Meet you where Dad come home. Just come home and we can fix this." "No," I snapped. The authority, returning to my voice. Despite the pain, no, home is not safe. Home is a trap. Home is where she tried to poison me. "Terrence, she put something in that soup. I saw the cat die. I saw it convulse and die right on the porch. She tried to kill me, and she will kill you too once she uses you up. Dad, stop. You are talking crazy again. Ashley loves us. She loves money. Terrence, she loves power. She is sleeping with her boss. She is planning to leave you as soon as she gets my signature. I saw the emails. I saw the proof on her computer. Liar, he shouted, but his voice cracked, the doubt creeping in like a weed in a crack in the sidewalk. Meet me at Washington Park, I said, cutting him off. Meet me by the old fountain where we used to sail your toy boats. Come alone. Terrence, do not tell her. Do not tell the police. Just come alone, and I will show you the truth. I will show you the way out. I can pay off Vinny. I can pay off everything. Just you and me. Son, one last chance to be a family. There was a long silence, a silence that stretched until I thought the line had gone dead. Then he whispered, "Okay, Dad. Okay, I will come. I will be there in 20 minutes. Just wait for me, please. Don't go anywhere." I hung up the phone and closed my eyes, letting my head rest against the bricks. He was coming. My boy was coming. I had a chance to save him, to show him the contract, to show him the $20 million and the future we could have without the viper coiling around his neck. I forced myself up, using the wall for support, grinding my teeth against the pain in my knee, and I started the long limp toward the park, moving through the shadows like a ghost haunting his own life. Washington Park was quiet at this hour, the streetlights humming overhead, casting long pools of yellow light on the grass. The old stone fountain was dry, filled with dead leaves and candy wrappers, a monument to neglect. I sat on the cold stone edge, my leg extended in front of me, throbbing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I watched the entrance of the park, watching for my son's truck, watching for salvation. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. I started to shiver, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving only the cold and the pain. Maybe he wasn't coming. Maybe he had gone back to sleep. Maybe I was a fool for trusting him. Then I saw headlights sweeping across the trees, a vehicle pulling up to the curb. It was Terrence's truck, the engine rumbling with that familiar knock. He never got fixed. The door opened and he stepped out, looking small and scared under the streetlights. He looked around nervously, his hands in his pockets, hunching his shoulders against the wind. "Dad," he called out softly. "Dad, are you here?" I stood up, waving my hand, emerging from the shadows. "Here, son, I am here." He saw me and started walking toward the fountain, his pace quickening. I felt a surge of relief, a warmth spreading through my chest. He came. He chose me. He chose his father over the lie. I reached into my jacket pocket, my fingers brushing. The envelope ready to pull it out, ready to change our lives. But then I heard it. The sound of sirens wailing in the distance, getting closer, fast, too fast, tires screeching around the corner, blue and red lights exploding against the trees, turning the park into a strobe light nightmare. 2 police cruisers roared into the parking lot, blocking the exit, their doors flying open before they even came to a full stop. Officers pouring out with flashlights and hands on their holsters, shouting commands. "Get down on the ground! Show us your hands!" And then behind them, a third car, a white SUV, Ashley's car. She jumped out, not looking scared, but looking triumphant, pointing a finger straight at me, her voice shrill and piercing like a siren itself. "There he is," she screamed. "That is him. He is the one. He is dangerous. He has a weapon. He threatened to kill us." I looked at Terrence, expecting him to be shocked, expecting him to run to me to tell them it was a mistake, but he didn't move. He didn't look surprised. He stopped walking and stood there halfway between me and the police, his head hanging low. "Terrence?" I whispered, the betrayal hitting me harder than the pavement had my son, my own blood. He looked up then, and I saw the tears on his face, but they weren't tears of repentance. They were tears of weakness. He raised his hand, a trembling finger pointing at his father, pointing at the man who had carried him on his shoulders. "That is him!" "Officer," Terrence sobbed, his voice loud enough for them to hear, loud enough to break my heart into dust. "That is my dad. He is sick. He is confused. He escaped from the house. He doesn't know what he is doing. Please don't hurt him. Just take him in. He set me up. He led them here. He used my love against me as bait. For the trap I stood there. My hands raised, my knee, buckling not from the injury but from the weight of the knife in my back. The officers rushed me, tackling me to the ground, forcing my face into the dirt. Grinding my bad knee into the gravel, I cried out end. Pain, a sharp animal sound that I couldn't hold back. They wrenched my arms behind my back. the handcuffs clicking shut with a sound of finality, cold steel biting into my wrists. "Stop!" I yelled, spitting dirt. "Stop! I am not crazy. Ask him. Ask my son. He knows." Ashley ran over, standing behind the wall of police, looking down at me with a look of pure, victorious malice. She was crying again, those fake, perfect tears that fooled everyone. "Officer, please be careful," she wailed. "He has dementia. He gets violent. He thinks everyone is trying to rob him. Thank God you found him. Thank God. Terrence called you." An officer hauled me up, roughly dragging me toward the police van. I stumbled my leg, useless. Dragging behind me like a dead weight, they pushed me against the side of the van, searching my pockets, pulling out the contract, the envelope I had guarded with my life. "What is this?" the officer asked, shining his flashlight on the papers. Ashley stepped forward, her eyes locking onto the document. "Nothing," she said. "Quickly, just his ramblings, old papers he hoards. He writes stories, he thinks he is a millionaire. Just put it with his personal effects, we will deal with it later." The officer threw the $20 million contract into a plastic evidence bag, dismissing it as the scribbles of a madman. Just as she wanted. I looked at Terrence. He was standing by the truck, unable to look at me, unable to witness the destruction he had caused. I shouted his name. "Terrence, look at me. Look at what you did." He walked over, then slowly stepping past his wife, stepping past the cops until he was standing right in front of me. I looked into his eyes, searching for a soul, searching for the boy I knew. "Why, son?" I asked, my voice broken. "Why did you do this?" He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale beer and fear, he whispered, so only I could hear a whisper that was meant to justify the unforgivable. "I am sorry, Dad," he hissed, tears streaming down his face. "I had to. Ashley is pregnant. She told me this morning. We are having a baby, Dad, a son. I need the money. I can't let my kid grow up poor like we did. I can't let him starve. I need the house, Dad. I need the pension. I did it for the family." Pregnant? It was a lie. A beautiful, terrible lie designed to manipulate a weak man. She wasn't pregnant. She was sleeping with her boss. She was planning her exit, but she knew exactly what string to pull to make Terrence dance. She used his desire for a family to destroy his real family. "She is lying, Terrence," I said, looking at him with pity and horror. "She is lying to you. She is playing you." He shook his head, refusing to hear it, refusing to believe. He stepped back, his face hardening, locking away his guilt behind a wall of denial. "Take him, officer." Terrence said, his voice loud and clear. "Take him to the facility. He needs help. We can't care for him anymore." The officer shoved me into the back of the van, the metal doors slamming shut, cutting off the sight of my son, cutting off the light, cutting off the world. I sat on the hard metal bench, the handcuffs digging into my skin, the pain in my knee throbbing in time with the sirens. I was going to the psych ward. I was going to a place where they lock people away and throw away the key. My own son had signed the warrant. My own son had sold me for a lie about a baby that didn't exist. I leaned my head against the cold metal wall of the van, and I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat there in the darkness, feeling the engine rumble beneath me, taking me away from my home, taking me away from my life. But as the van turned onto the highway, I felt something else, something cold and hard settling in my chest. It wasn't hope, and it wasn't despair, it was patience. They thought they had won. They thought the game was over, because I was in chains. But they forgot one thing. They forgot that I was Caleb Jenkins, and I had survived wars and poverty and heartbreak. They forgot that the contract was in a plastic bag at the station, and Darnell was still out there, and Green Tech was still waiting. I closed my eyes, listening to the sirens, and I whispered to the empty van, "Enjoy the victory. Terrence, enjoy the lie, because when I get out of here, and I will get out of here, I am not coming back as your father, I am coming back as your landlord, and eviction day is coming." The psych ward didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled like a zoo, where the animals had been drugged into submission. The air was thick with the scent of industrial floor wax and unwashed bodies, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped flies inside your skull. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the day room, watching a man in a hospital gown argue with a potted plant while a woman in the corner rocked back and forth, humming a nursery rhyme that had no end. I was 75 years old. I was a millionaire, and I was wearing paper slippers in a room full of people who had lost their grip on reality. Only I hadn't lost mine. I was the only sane man in an insane asylum, and that made the torture worse because I knew exactly what was happening to me. It had been 3 days since the police dragged me away from my son, 3 days of heavy sedation and questions I refused to answer. 3 days of wondering if Darnell knew where I was or if Green Tech had given up on me. I was stuck in a limbo designed to break the spirit, a place where time didn't exist and hope was contraband. I kept my head down. I took the little paper cups of pills they gave me and hid them under my tongue, spitting them into the toilet when the nurses weren't looking. I needed my mind sharp. I needed to be ready because I knew she was coming. And she did come on the 4th morning, strutting into the secure visiting room like she owned the place. Ashley was wearing a crisp white suit that looked like it cost more than the orderly's annual salary. She sat down on the other side of the plexiglass partition and picked up the phone, looking at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. She looked at my gray hospital scrubs, she looked at my unkempt beard, and she smiled, that shark smile. "Hello, Caleb," she said, her voice tinny through the receiver. "You look terrible. Shady Pines would have been a resort compared to this hellhole. I told you, we should have done it the easy way." I picked up the phone, my hand steady, despite the rage boiling in my veins. "What do you want?" "Ashley," I asked, my voice rough from disuse. "I want you to sign the transfer deed," she said, pulling a document from her designer bag and pressing it against the glass sign over the farm. "Caleb sign over the house, and I will drop the petition for guardianship. I will tell the judge. You have stabilized. I will get you out of here. You can go live in a nice little apartment somewhere far away and never bother us again. Just give me the land." I looked at the paper pressed against the glass, the ink black and demanding. She still thought it was about $5,000. She still thought she was stealing pennies. She had no idea. She was trying to rob a bank vault with a bobby pin. I leaned forward, my breath fogging the glass. "Never," I whispered. "I will rot in here before I give you a single inch of my father's dirt. You put me here, Ashley. You and your lies about a baby that doesn't exist. You turned my son against me." She laughed, a cold, hard sound. "Oh, Caleb, you are so dramatic." The baby was a stroke of genius, wasn't it? "Terrence is so soft he will believe anything I tell him. He is terrified of me." Caleb terrified. I will leave him terrified. I will expose his debts. He will do whatever I say, and right now he believes you belong in here. He believes you are dangerous. So sign the paper or spend the rest of your life watching that man argue with the fern. I stared at her, memorizing the cruelty in her eyes, fueling my resolve. I put the phone back on the hook and walked away, leaving her screaming silently behind the glass, leaving her with nothing but her greed. She didn't know. I had already signed the land away. She didn't know she was fighting for a ghost. I went back to the day room, my mind racing. I needed a way out. I needed a message to get to the outside world. I sat down at a small round table where a young man was playing solitaire with a deck of cards that only had 51 cards. He was skinny with dark circles under his eyes and hair that stuck up in every direction. He looked like a junkie or a burnout, someone the system had chewed up and spit out. "Mind if I sit?" I asked. He looked up and his eyes were surprisingly clear, sharp, and intelligent, not the glazed look of the medicated. He looked at the orderlies by the door. Then he looked back at me and dropped his voice to a whisper. "You are the lithium guy. Aren't you the one? The news is talking about the mystery owner." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "How do you know that?" He smirked, shuffling the cards with a dexterity that spoke of practice. "I know a lot of things, Mr. Jenkins. My name is Julian. I am not a patient. I am a journalist for the Tribune. I had myself committed 2 weeks ago to expose the abuse in this facility, the fraudulent billing, the forced medication, the doctors taking kickbacks. I have been gathering evidence, but nobody here has a story like yours. I heard the orderlies talking. They said, you are the guy holding up the Green Tech deal, the guy whose family locked him up to steal a fortune." I looked at him, assessing him. He was young, hungry, dangerous. He was exactly what I needed. "You are a reporter?" I asked. "Investigative," he corrected. "I specialize in corruption, and your daughter-in-law is a walking headline. Listen to me, Caleb. I can get you out of here. I have a contact on the outside who picks up my notes in the laundry delivery truck, but I need a hook. I need the full story. If you give me the exclusive, if you give me the dirt on the fraud, the fake medical records, the whole conspiracy, I will put you on the front page tomorrow morning." I looked at the cards on the table, looking at the missing king, and I realized I had just found it. I leaned in close, pretending to watch his game, and I started talking. I told him everything. I told him about the fake credit cards Ashley opened in my name. I told him about the real estate fraud she was running at her job, skimming commissions and faking appraisals. I told him about the poison soup and the dead cat. Told him about the $20 million contract and the 30-day clause that was about to expire. I gave him names, I gave him dates, I gave him the ammunition to destroy her. Julian listened, memorizing every detail, his eyes lighting up with the thrill of the story. "This is dynamite, Caleb," he whispered. "This isn't just elder abuse, this is grand larceny, this is attempted murder, and the lithium angle that makes it national news. You are sitting on a powder keg." "Write it," I said. "Write it all and tell Darnell Washington where I am. Tell him to bring the cavalry." Julian nodded, slipping a card into his sleeve. "I will get it out tonight. Watch the news tomorrow morning. Mr. Jenkins, you are about to become famous." He went back to his game, acting the part of the disturbed patient, muttering to himself as the orderlies walked by. I sat there watching him, knowing that I had just launched a missile straight at Ashley's house. The next morning, the atmosphere in the ward was different. The nurses were whispering in huddles, glancing at me with wide, fearful eyes. The orderlies were being polite, too polite. The TV in the day room was usually tuned to cartoons, but today it was on the local news channel. I sat in front of it, my heart hammering, waiting, and then I saw it. The morning anchor, a woman with perfect hair and a serious face, was holding up a copy of the Tribune. The headline was in bold black letters 3 inches high. "The billion-dollar prisoner, how a family locked up a lithium tycoon to steal his fortune." The report cut to a picture of me, a photo taken from my old employee ID at the rail yard, looking strong and proud, and then a picture of the farm in Alabama, and then a picture of Ashley and Terrence taken from her social media, looking smug and rich. The anchor's voice filled the room. "Sources confirm that 75-year-old Caleb Jenkins, currently being held against his will at the Rolling Hills Psychiatric Facility, is the sole owner of the newly discovered lithium deposit in Alabama, valued at over $20 million. Investigative reports allege that his son and daughter-in-law conspired to have him declared incompetent using forged medical documents and fake police reports to seize control of the asset before the deal with Green Tech could be finalized. The FBI has reportedly opened an investigation into real estate fraud and elder abuse based on evidence provided by a whistleblower." I sat there and a smile spread across my face, a smile that felt like sunshine after a long winter. I looked around the room and the other patients were clapping. The crazy man who argued with the plant gave me a thumbs up. Julian winked at me from the corner. Meanwhile, across town in the kitchen of the house I used to own, Ashley was sitting at the table drinking her morning coffee, scrolling through her phone, planning her day, thinking she had won. She picked up the newspaper that had just been delivered, snapping it open to check the real estate listings, and then she froze. Her coffee cup slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor and shattering, spilling dark liquid across the tile. But she didn't move. She didn't scream. She just stared at the paper, her face draining of color until she looked like a ghost. She read the headline, she read the subhead. She read her own name printed in black and white, accused of crimes she thought were buried. She read about the $20 million. She read about the lithium. She read that the old man she had thrown in the loony bin was the richest man she had ever met, and she had just handed him the keys to her destruction. She dropped the paper, her hands shaking so hard they looked like blurred wings. She looked at the kitchen, at the appliances she couldn't pay for, at the life she had built on lies. And she realized with a sickening lurch in her stomach that the train hadn't just arrived. It had run her over. I sat in the psych ward listening to the commotion at the front desk, hearing the shouting of lawyers, hearing the heavy boots of the state police coming to liberate me, and I knew that the game was over. I wasn't the prisoner anymore. I was the warden, and Ashley was about to find out that the cell she built for me was actually reserved for her. The noise outside the heavy security doors of Ward C wasn't the usual sound of orderlies shuffling or patients screaming. It was a different kind of noise, a low rumble that grew into a roar like a thunderstorm rolling across the plains. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the commotion, the sound of authority, of heavy boots and serious voices demanding entry. The door to the day room flew open with a violence that made the hinges rattle, and there, standing in the opening like avenging angels, were Darnell Washington and Mr. Sterling from Green Tech, flanked by 2 state troopers in full uniform, looking like they were ready to invade a small country. I stood up, my heart hammering a rhythm of victory against my ribs. Darnell saw me, and his face broke into a grin that was half relief and half pure predatory satisfaction. He didn't look like the small-town lawyer I had known for 40 years. He looked like a general coming to liberate a prisoner of war. He pointed a finger at me and shouted, "There he is! Get him out of here now!" But then a small, oily man in a white coat stepped in front of them, blocking the path. Dr. Vance, the facility director, the man who had taken Ashley's money to keep me drugged and quiet. He held up a hand, his face red and sweating, trying to maintain control of his little kingdom. "You cannot just barge in here," he stammered, his voice high and shrill. "This is a medical facility. Mr. Jenkins is under a court-ordered psychiatric hold. He is a danger to himself and others. You have no authority to remove him without a judge's signature." Sterling stepped forward, and he didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a shark in a three-piece suit. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document stamped with a gold seal that caught the fluorescent light like a shield. He shoved it into Dr. Vance's chest, forcing the little man to stumble back. "This isn't from a judge," Sterling said, his voice ice-cold. "This is an executive order signed by the governor of the state of Alabama 45 minutes ago, declaring the Jenkins Lithium Project a matter of critical state infrastructure and national energy security. Mr. Caleb Jenkins is the primary stakeholder in a billion-dollar enterprise, and you are currently holding a state asset against his will. You have exactly 10 seconds to step aside, or these troopers will arrest you for kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and interfering with a state official." Dr. Vance looked at the document, his eyes bulging. He looked at the troopers who had their hands resting near their weapons. And then he looked at me, standing there in my hospital scrubs, looking back at him with a gaze that promised retribution. He realized in that second that the money Ashley had paid him wasn't enough to cover the price of his career. He wilted, stepping aside, shrinking into the wall like a cockroach trying to hide from the light. I walked out of that day room, my head held high, ignoring the stares of the staff who had treated me like cattle. Darnell met me halfway, wrapping me in a bear hug that smelled of expensive cologne and tobacco. "I told you I would bring the cavalry. Caleb," he whispered in my ear, "let's get you out of these rags." They led me to a private office that they had commandeered. Sterling opened a garment bag he had brought with him, revealing a charcoal gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. It wasn't just clothing, it was armor. It was the uniform of the man I was about to become. I stripped off the humiliating hospital pajamas, leaving them in a pile on the floor, and I dressed slowly, buttoning the shirt, tying the tie, feeling the transformation take hold. I wasn't the confused old man in the basement anymore. I wasn't the victim in the back of the police van. I was Caleb Jenkins, and I was ready for war. When I walked out of that office, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked sharp. I looked dangerous. The gray beard I had trimmed myself looked distinguished against the dark wool of the suit. I walked with a cane. Sterling had provided a sleek black stick with a silver handle, not because I needed it, but because it looked like a scepter. We walked toward the main exit, the automatic doors sliding open to reveal a sea of flashing lights and cameras. Julian, the reporter, had done his job well. The parking lot was packed with news vans, reporters from every major network, and a crowd of onlookers who had heard the rumors about the Lithium King trapped in the psych ward. The moment I stepped out into the sunlight, a roar went up from the crowd. Cameras clicked like 1,000 cicadas. Microphones were thrust in my direction. Questions shouted over one another. "Mr. Jenkins, is it true about the mine? Mr. Jenkins, did your family frame you? Mr. Jenkins, how much is it worth?" I stopped at the top of the stairs, looking down at the circus. Darnell stood on my right, Sterling on my left. I raised my hand and the crowd fell silent, waiting for the words of the madman who had turned out to be a genius. I cleared my throat, my voice strong and clear, amplified by the microphone's boom mic hovering overhead. "My name is Caleb Jenkins," I said, looking directly into the camera lens, knowing that somewhere across town my image was being beamed into the living room of the house I used to own. "I am 75 years old. I am a retired railroad worker, and I am of sound mind and body, despite what my son and his wife would have you believe." I paused, letting the words sink in, letting the accusation hang in the air. For the past week, I have been held prisoner against my will, a victim of a conspiracy fueled by greed and betrayal. My own family tried to erase me, tried to steal the legacy my father left me, but they failed, because truth has a way of digging itself out of the dirt. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the copy of the contract Sterling had given me, holding it up for the world to see. This land, this dirt that my family tried to sell for pennies, is the future of Energy in this country today, I am announcing the formation of the Jenkins Lithium Corporation in partnership with Greentech Energy. We are sitting on the largest lithium deposit in the Southeast, and I am the sole owner. The crowd erupted again, shouting questions, shouting congratulations, but I wasn't done. I looked into the camera again, my eyes narrowing, speaking directly to the two people who had tried to destroy me, to those who thought I was a burden, who thought I was worthless. Watch closely, because I am not just an old man anymore. I am the landlord. I am the bank, and the rent is past due. Across town, in the living room of the house that still smelled of the poison soup, Ashley and Terrence sat frozen on the sofa, staring at the 60-inch television screen. Ashley held a cup of coffee that was shaking so hard the liquid was splashing onto her hand, burning her skin. But she didn't feel it. Her face was a mask of absolute horror. The blood drained away, leaving her looking like a wax figure, melting in the heat. She watched me on the screen, looking powerful, looking rich, looking sane. She listened to my words, and she felt the walls of her life crumbling down around her. She realized with a sickening lurch that the man she had mocked, the man she had tried to kill, was the man she had needed all along. She had held the winning lottery ticket in her hand, and she had thrown it in the trash because it looked like an old receipt. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, this can't be real. $20 million. He has $20 million, and we are broke. We are going to jail." Terrence sat next to her, his arms still in the sling, his face still bruised from the beating. He looked at his father on the screen, and he started to cry, not the fake tears he had shed for the police, but real tears of regret and terror. He saw the man he had betrayed, the man he had handcuffed, and he saw the end of his life. "We are dead, Ashley," he moaned, rocking back and forth. "We are dead." Suddenly his phone rang. On the coffee table, a harsh, jarring sound that made them both jump. It wasn't the police, it wasn't a lawyer. The caller ID simply said. Vinnie Terrence stared at the phone as if it were a bomb. He knew what it meant. Vinnie was watching TV too. Vinnie saw the news. Vinnie saw that Terrence's father was a multi-millionaire, and Vinnie wanted his money. Now Ashley lunged for the phone, trying to grab it, but Terrence stopped her, his good hand shaking. "Don't answer it," he whispered. "Don't answer it." But the phone kept ringing, insistent, demanding a debt collector that wouldn't take no for an answer. Back at the hospital, I finished my statement and turned to walk toward the waiting limousine. Darnell opened the door for me, smiling like a Cheshire cat. "That was perfect, Caleb," he said. "Perfect." I settled into the leather seat, feeling the luxury, feeling the power, but mostly feeling the cold satisfaction of justice served. I looked out the tinted window as we drove away, leaving the hospital behind, leaving the nightmare behind drive. I said to the chauffeur, "Take me to the hotel. I have a party to plan. I was going to celebrate. I was going to throw the biggest party this town had ever seen, and I was going to invite everyone, the lawyers, the press, the governor, and yes, I was going to invite Terrence and Ashley because the final act of this tragedy needed an audience, and I wanted to look them in the eye when the curtain finally fell." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel smelled of money, old money, new money, and the kind of desperate money that tries to hide its scent under layers of expensive perfume. The crystal chandeliers overhead sparkled like diamonds caught in a spiderweb, casting a golden glow over the 300 guests who had gathered to celebrate the birth of the Jenkins Lithium Corporation. There were senators shaking hands with mining magnates, there were bankers trying to catch my eye, and there were reporters waiting like vultures for a quote. I stood at the head of the room, leaning on my silver-handled cane, watching the circus I had created, feeling a cold ball of anticipation in my stomach that had nothing to do with the champagne and everything to do with the execution I was about to perform. I had sent the invitations by courier, hand-delivered to the house where my son and his wife were currently hiding from their creditors. I made sure the card was embossed with gold leaf, and I made sure the note inside was personal. I wrote that family should be together for the biggest night of our lives, and I knew they would come. I knew Ashley's greed was stronger than her shame, and I knew Terrence's fear of poverty was stronger than his fear of me. And right on cue, the double doors at the back of the room swung open and they walked in like royalty arriving at a coronation. Ashley was wearing a red dress that was tight enough to cut off her circulation and glittered under the lights, looking like a walking wound. She had her hair piled high on her head, and she was clinging to Terrence's good arm, steering him through the crowd like a show pony. Terrence looked less confident. His tuxedo didn't fit right. probably rented at the last minute, and his eyes were darting around the room, looking for the exit, looking for the police, looking for Vinny. I watched them work. The room watched Ashley flash that $1,000,000 smile at people she didn't know. Watched her laugh too loudly at jokes she didn't hear. She was playing the part of the devoted daughter-in-law, the woman behind the man she was trying to rewrite history in real time, pretending that the last week hadn't happened, pretending she hadn't poisoned a cat and thrown me in a psych ward. She was banking on my silence. She was banking on the idea that I would want to save face in front of the governor, that I would sweep the dirt under the rug to protect the family name. She was wrong. They spotted me across the room, and Ashley's face lit up with a terrifying artificial joy. She pulled Terrence forward, cutting through a group of investors, ignoring their annoyed looks, marching straight toward the stage where I was standing with Darnell. "Dad," she cried out, her voice pitching high to be heard over the string quartet. "Oh, Dad, you look magnificent, look at you." The man of the hour. She reached me and threw her arms around my neck, hugging me tight, whispering in my ear so only I could hear. "Just play along, Caleb. We are a family, we can fix this, just smile for the cameras." I stood stiff as a board, letting her hug a statue. I didn't hug back, I didn't smile, I just looked at Terrence, who was standing a few feet away, looking at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. "Hey, Dad," Terrence mumbled. "I am glad you are okay." I looked at him, the boy who had handcuffed me with his lies, and I felt nothing. Not hate, not love, just a cold, hollow emptiness. "I am better than okay, son," I said, my voice flat. "I am victorious." Ashley pulled back, beaming at the photographers who were snapping pictures of the happy family reunion she posed, tilting her head, resting her hand on my chest, right over the pocket where I used to keep my heart. "Isn't this wonderful?" she gushed to a reporter who had drifted close. "We always knew Caleb was sitting on a gold mine. We just wanted to make sure he was protected. That is why we were so worried about him. But now, well, now we can all celebrate together. She was good. I had to give her that. She was spinning the narrative, turning her attempted theft into protective custody. She thought she had won. She thought she had maneuvered her way back onto the payroll." I looked at Darnell, who was checking his watch, and he gave me a subtle nod. It was time. I pulled away from Ashley gently but firmly, brushing her hand off my suit like it was a piece of lint. "Why don't you two take a seat?" I said, pointing to the table right in front of the stage, the VIP table reserved just for them. "I have a speech to make, and I want you front and center so you don't miss a word." Ashley's eyes sparkled with greed. She thought I was going to announce their share of the profits. She thought I was going to welcome them back into the fold. "Of course, Dad," she said, grabbing Terrence's hand. "We will be right here cheering you on." They sat down at the round table covered in white linen, picking up crystal flutes of champagne, toasting each other, smiling like lottery winners. I walked up the 3 steps to the podium, the microphone waiting for me like a judge's gavel. The room went quiet, the chatter dying down as the lights dimmed, leaving a single spotlight on me and a large projection screen blank and white behind me. I gripped the sides of the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, looking down at Ashley, who was blowing me a kiss, looking at Terrence, who was drinking his champagne too fast. "Welcome, everyone," I said, my voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you for coming to celebrate the Jenkins Lithium Project. Tonight is a night of revelation, a night where we dig deep into the earth to find what is valuable, and we strip away the dirt to find the truth." There was polite applause. Ashley clapped the hardest, her bracelets jingling. My father, Silas. Jenkins left me this land because he knew its worth, not in money but in character. He knew that land doesn't lie, dirt doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. People, however, are different. People wear masks. People smile while they hold a knife behind their back. I saw Ashley's smile falter just a fraction. I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. For the past few weeks, I have learned a hard lesson about value. I learned that $20 million can buy a lot of things. It can buy a mine, it can buy a suit, it can buy a lawyer, but it cannot buy loyalty, and it certainly cannot buy love. The room was deadly silent now, the tension thickening, the guests sensing that this wasn't a normal acceptance speech. My own family sits here tonight, front row center, smiling, clapping, pretending. I pointed a finger at them, and the spotlight widened to include their table, exposing them in the harsh white light. They want you to believe they are here to support me. They want you to believe they are loving children who only wanted the best for their aging father. But I believe in showing, not telling. So before we cut the cake, I want to share a little family home movie with you. Something that captures the true spirit of the Jenkins household. Ashley froze her champagne glass halfway to her mouth, her eyes darting to the screen. Behind me, Terrence looked up, his mouth hanging open, fear dawning on his face. I nodded to the tech guy in the back. "Roll it," I commanded. The screen behind me flared to life, huge and high definition, the sound amplifying through the concert speakers. It was the footage from the porch the night of the soup. The image was grainy but clear enough, the timestamp glowing in the corner. The guests watched in confusion, at first seeing an old man feeding a cat, but then the cat started to convulse. The sound of its dying growls echoed through the ballroom, amplified 100 times, a horrific gurgling sound that made people gasp and cover their mouths. Then they heard my voice on the video booming through the room. "What was in the soup, Ashley? What did you put in there to help me sleep?" And then Ashley's voice, shrill and defensive, telling me I was crazy, telling me nobody would believe me, telling me to die. The camera zoomed in on the dying plant, the leaves wilting in seconds under the toxic assault. Murmur of horror swept through the room like a wave. People turned to look at Ashley, who was sitting frozen in her chair, her face pale as death, her red dress looking like blood. But the video wasn't done. It cut to a new scene. The park at night, the blue lights of the police cars flashing blindingly bright on the big screen. There was Ashley screaming at the police, lying, framing me, calling me dangerous, and then the camera focused on Terrence, standing in the spotlight of shame, pointing his finger at me. "That is him, officer!" The recorded voice of my son boomed out, betraying me all over again. "Take him away. He is sick. He is crazy." The guests were standing up now. Shock and outrage ripples through the crowd. The governor looked disgusted. Darnell stood with his arms crossed, a grim satisfaction on his face. I looked down at them. My real family exposed. My fake family destroyed. Ashley was shaking her head, mouthing the word "no" over and over again. Terrence had put his head on the table, covering his ears, trying to block out the sound of his own treachery. I leaned into the microphone, my voice cutting through the noise. "That is the truth," I roared. "That is the woman who tried to poison me for an inheritance that didn't exist yet. That is the son who handcuffed his father to pay a gambling debt. You came here tonight thinking you would get a check. You came here thinking I would forget. But I am Caleb Jenkins, and I never forget." Ashley snapped. She stood up, screaming, a sound of pure animal panic overriding the video. She lunged toward the stage, knocking over the table, sending champagne glasses crashing to the floor, shattering like her future. "It is a lie!" she shrieked, her face twisted and ugly, running toward me, her hands hooked into claws. "Turn it off. Turn it off." He tampered with it. "He is crazy. Don't listen to him." She ran up the stairs, tripping on her dress, scrambling on hands and knees, trying to get to me, trying to get to the microphone, trying to stop the truth. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just watched her come, a pathetic creature driven by a hunger that would never be filled. Before she could reach me, two large men in black suits, security guards hired by Green Tech, stepped out from the wings. They grabbed her by the arms, hauling her back effortlessly, lifting her off the ground as she kicked and screamed, spitting curses at me. "Let me go," she yelled. "I am his family. I am entitled to that money. I earned it. I put up with him for years. You owe me, Caleb. You owe me." "Get her out of here," I said calmly into the microphone. "Get the trash off my stage." The guards dragged her down the stairs, her heels scraping across the wood, her red dress bunching up, revealing the desperation underneath. She was wailing now, a keening sound of total defeat, being dragged past the silent, horrified guests, past the cameras that were flashing, blindingly capturing her downfall for the morning news. I looked at Terrence. He hadn't moved. He was still sitting at the overturned table, surrounded by broken glass and spilled champagne, weeping into his hands, alone in a room full of people. I looked out at the crowd, at the governor, at the investors, and I straightened my tie. I apologized for the interruption, I said, my voice steady, turning my back on the screaming woman being hauled out the door. Now, as I was saying, the Jenkins Lithium Corporation is open for business, and we are going to build something real. Something that lasts. Something that isn't built on lies. The room erupted in applause, thunderous and approving, drowning out the last echoes of Ashley's screams. But I didn't smile. I just looked at my son one last time. A small, broken figure in a rented tuxedo, and I knew that the hardest part was over. The poison was gone, and now the healing could begin. Part 16. The final payoff. The applause died down, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the noise that preceded it, the kind of silence that comes after a thunderclap when the world is waiting for the rain. I stood on the stage looking down at the wreckage of my family. The video screen behind me had gone black, but the images were burned into the retinas of every person in the room. Ashley was still screaming in the grip of the security guards, but her screams had changed. They weren't angry anymore. They were terrified because she saw the men in blue uniforms pushing through the crowd. It wasn't just any officers. It was Detective Miller, the man who had arrested me in the park, the man who had put me in the van. He walked up to the stage, his face grim, his eyes locked on Ashley. He didn't look at me. He didn't apologize, not yet. He had a job to do, and for the first time in a week, he was going to do it right. He walked up to Ashley, who was struggling against the guards, her red dress torn at the shoulder, her makeup running in black rivulets down her face, looking like a clown caught in the rain. Miller pulled out his handcuffs, the metal glinting under the chandeliers, and he spun her around, rougher than he needed to be. "Ashley Jenkins," he said, his voice carrying to the back of the room, "you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Caleb Jenkins, for multiple counts of real estate fraud, and for the aggravated abuse of an elderly person. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." Ashley let out a wail that sounded like a dying animal. "No," she shrieked. "You can't do this. I am pregnant. I am having his grandchild. You can't arrest a pregnant woman." I stepped up to the edge of the stage, looking down at her, looking at the woman who had poisoned my soup and poisoned my son's mind. "You aren't pregnant, Ashley," I said, my voice amplified by the speaker's calm and cold like the grave. "I saw the medical records on your computer. I saw the emails to your boss. You aren't carrying an heir. You are just carrying lies." The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath, at the final exposure of her deceit. Ashley went limp in the detective's arms, the fight draining out of her as the last card in her deck turned out to be a joker. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw the real Ashley. Not the manipulator, not the predator, but a scared little girl who had gambled everything on black, and the ball landed on red. "Get her out of here," Miller said, nodding to his partner. They dragged her away, her heels scraping the floor, her screams fading into incoherent sobs, begging for a lawyer, begging for mercy, begging for a life she had thrown away. I watched her go, watched the double doors swing shut behind her, and I felt a weight lift off my chest, a weight I had been carrying since the day she walked into my house. Then there was only Terrence. He was still sitting at the overturned table, surrounded by the shards of champagne flutes and the puddles of expensive wine. He looked small. He looked like a child wearing his father's suit. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen, his arm in the sling trembling. He stood up slowly, his legs shaking, and he walked toward the stage. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the cameras. He only looked at me. "Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. He walked until he was right below me at the foot of the stairs, and then he did something I never thought I would see a Jenkins do. He dropped to his knees, right there on the wine-stained carpet. He fell to his knees in front of 300 people, in front of the governor, in front of the cameras. He clasped his good hand over his bad one, and he bowed his head. "Dad, please," he sobbed, his shoulders heaving. "I am sorry. I didn't know. She made me do it. She told me you were sick. She told me it was for the best. I was scared, Dad. I was scared of losing everything. Please forgive me. I am your son." I looked down at him, at the top of his head where the hair was starting to thin, just like mine had at his age. I looked at the man I had raised, the boy I had taught to fish, the teenager I had bailed out of trouble more times than I could count. I remembered the day he was born, holding him in my hands, promising to protect him from the world. But I realized now that I hadn't protected him. I had enabled him. I had cushioned every fall. I had paid every debt, and I had created a man who couldn't stand on his own 2 feet. I walked down the stairs slowly, my cane tapping on each step, a metronome counting down the end of our relationship. I stood in front of him, looming over him, my shadow falling across his face. "Stand up," I said, my voice hard. He looked up, hope flickering in his wet eyes. He thought I was going to hug him. He thought I was going to pick him up and brush him off like I always did. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose on his sleeve, reaching out for me. "Dad, thank you," he stammered. "I knew you wouldn't abandon me. We can start over, right? We can fix this. I can help you. Run the company. I can learn." I took a step back, putting distance between us. Putting a canyon between his need and my money, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a white envelope. It was thick and crisp, sealed with the wax stamp of the new corporation. Terrence's eyes locked onto it. His greed flaring up even through his fear, he thought it was a check. He thought it was his salvation. He thought it was the easy way out. I held it out to him. "This is for you," I said. He grabbed it, his hands shaking, tearing it open with his teeth, ripping the paper in his haste. He pulled out the document inside, unfolding it with trembling fingers, expecting to see a routing number, expecting to see zeros. But it wasn't a check. It was a single sheet of paper, a standard form with the Green Tech logo at the top. Terrence stared at it, his brow furrowing confusion replacing the greed. "What is this?" he asked, looking up at me. "What is this, Dad?" I leaned in close so he could see the fire in my eyes, so he could see that the bank was closed forever. "It is a job application." "Terrence," I said. "Job." He repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. "Yes, a job," I said, pointing to the paper. "Specifically an entry-level position for a sanitation engineer at the Jenkins lithium mine. We need men to sweep the floors. We need men to clean the toilets. We need men to scrub the grease off the machinery. Starting pay is $15 an hour." He looked at me as if I had slapped him. "Dad, you can't be serious. You are a millionaire. You have $20 million and you want me to be a janitor." "I have $20 million, I corrected him. "You have nothing. You have a mountain of debt and a criminal record pending for filing a false police report. I am giving you a chance, Terrence, a chance to do something you have never done in your life. I am giving you a chance to earn $1 with your own sweat." "But I am your son," he wailed, his voice rising, pitching into a whine. I looked at him cold and unyielding. "I don't have a son," I said, my voice booming through the silent room, carrying to the back rows where the reporters were scribbling furiously. "I had a son. Once he was a good boy. He liked baseball and he loved his mother, but that boy died a long time ago. The man standing in front of me is a stranger. A stranger who handcuffed his father, a stranger who watched his wife poison a helpless animal, a stranger who tried to lock me in a cage to steal my money." Terrence flinched as if I had hit him. "You are not a son," I said. Finality in every syllable. "You are a failed investment. I poured love and money into you for 30 years, and all I got back was bankruptcy and betrayal. So I am cutting my losses." I pointed at the paper in his hand. "If you want money, Terrence, you take that application, you go to the mine, and you get in line with every other man who wants to work for a living. You put on a hard hat, you pick up a broom, and you learn what it means to be a man. And if you work hard, if you show up every day for 5 years maybe, just maybe we can talk about family again. But until then, you are on your own." I turned my back on him, walking away toward Darnell and Sterling, toward the future I had built. Terrence stood there holding the paper, his mouth open, tears streaming down his face, but nobody moved to comfort him. The crowd looked at him with disdain, with the cold judgment of people who know the value of loyalty. "Dad," he called out one last time, a weak, pathetic sound. "Wait." I didn't wait. I didn't stop. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his life, holding a mop bucket application in a room full of millionaires. I walked out into the night, the cool air hitting my face, feeling cleaner than I had in years. The poison was gone, the leech was removed, and for the first time in my life, I was truly free. The red clay of Alabama doesn't wash off easy. It gets into your pores, it stains your clothes, and it reminds you where you came from. I sat on the porch of my new house, a sprawling cabin built of cedar and stone overlooking the valley where the lithium mine was humming in the distance. And I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. It had been 6 months since the night at the plaza. 6 months since I watched the police drag Ashley away screaming like a banshee, and 6 months since I walked away from my son, leaving him with nothing but a job application. The silence out here was different from the silence in the basement. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't lonely. It was the peaceful silence of a man who has settled his debts with the universe. I took a sip of my iced tea, the condensation cold against my hand, and I looked down at the dog sleeping at my feet, a big black Labrador mix I named Justice. I found him at the shelter the day after the trial. A stray that nobody wanted. Just like that cat Ashley killed. Only this one was going to live like a king, eating steak scraps and sleeping on a rug that cost more than Ashley's car. I didn't keep. All the money, $20 million is too much for one old man to spend on whiskey and fishing tackle. I kept enough to be comfortable enough to ensure I would never have to worry about the electric bill again. But the rest went back into the dirt. I broke ground last month on the Silas Jenkins Memorial School, a place where the kids in this county who grew up poor like me can learn to code and learn to build, and learn that they are worth more than the cotton they used to pick. I hired the best teachers, I bought the best computers, and I made sure that every child who walked through those doors got a hot meal and a fair shake. Then there was the clinic. I built it right next to the school, a state-of-the-art facility with doctors who didn't look at your insurance card before they looked at your face. I remembered how my mother died because we couldn't afford a specialist. I remembered the pain of being poor and sick, so I made it free. Free for the miners, free for the farmers, free for the widows. It was the best money I ever spent. Signing those checks felt better than any applause I ever got. The screen door creaked open behind me, and Odessa walked out carrying a bowl of fresh peaches. She was wearing a yellow dress that made her dark skin glow, and she was smiling that smile that had saved my life. She sat down in the rocker next to me, reaching out to take my hand, her grip strong and warm. "You thinking about him again?" "Caleb?" she asked. Knowing me better than I knew myself, I nodded, looking out toward the mine where the lights were starting to flicker on for the night shift. "I can't help it. Odessa. He is still my blood, even if that blood is bad. He is learning," she said, squeezing my hand. "He is learning the hard way. But he is learning." I stood up, grabbing my cane. "Come on," I said, "let's go for a drive. I need to see it." We got into my new truck, a black Ford with leather seats that felt like butter, and I drove down the winding road toward the mine. The facility was massive, a sprawling complex of machinery and conveyor belts extracting the white gold from the earth. The Green Tech logo was painted on the side of the main building, but right underneath it, in letters just as big, were the words, "Jenkins Lithium." I drove past the security gate, the guards waving me through with respect. They knew who I was. They knew I was the man who signed their paychecks. I drove slowly along the perimeter road, watching the men work, watching the excavators dig, watching the trucks haul the ore. And then I saw him. He was working on crew number 4, the cleanup crew responsible for clearing the debris from the access roads. He was wearing a bright orange safety vest that was stained with grease and mud. He had a hard hat pulled low over his eyes, and he was holding a shovel digging into a pile of wet, red clay. Terrence looked different. He had lost 20 pounds. The softness of his face replaced by the gaunt angles of exhaustion. His hands, which used to be manicured and soft, were now wrapped in tape, probably hiding blisters that were raw and weeping. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking for a shortcut. He was digging, lifting the heavy dirt, throwing it into the back of a truck, doing it again and again, a rhythm of labor that I knew well. I stopped the truck on the ridge above him, the engine idling quietly. I watched my son work. I watched him wipe the sweat from his forehead with a dirty sleeve. I watched him take a swig of warm water from a plastic jug. I watched him struggle. A part of me wanted to honk. The horn, wanted to call him over, wanted to write him a check and take him out of that hole, wanted to save him from the heat and the ache, but I stayed silent. I kept my foot on the brake and my hands on the wheel because I knew that if I saved him now, I would lose him forever. He needed this. He needed the sweat. He needed the pain. He needed to know what a dollar actually weighed. He needed to understand that the world doesn't owe him a living and that a man is defined by what he produces, not what he consumes. Terrence paused, leaning on his shovel, catching his breath. He looked up toward the ridge, shielding his eyes against the setting sun. He saw the black truck. He saw the silhouette of the man inside. He knew it was me. He knew his father was watching him. For a second I thought he would wave. I thought he would beg. I thought he would throw down the shovel and quit. But he didn't. He just looked at me for a long moment, his face unreadable, his expression hard, and then he turned back to the pile of dirt. He gripped the shovel, and he went back to work, digging, lifting, throwing, digging, lifting, throwing. He didn't wave, and I didn't honk. It was the most honest communication we had ever had in our lives. He was telling me he was still standing, and I was telling him I was still watching. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving him in the dust, leaving him to find his own salvation. I looked over at Odessa, and she was smiling, a sad, proud smile. "He will be all right," she whispered. "He is building muscle, Caleb muscle, he never had." I drove us back up the mountain, back to the cabin, back to the peace I had earned. The sun was gone now, replaced by a blanket of stars that looked like diamonds scattered on black velvet. I parked the truck and we walked up the steps to the porch, the dog greeting us with a wagging tail. I sat down in my chair and looked out at the darkness, at the lights of the mine glowing in the distance. The empire I had built, the legacy I had saved. I thought about Ashley sitting in a cell somewhere wearing orange, thinking about the millions she almost had, thinking about the soup and the cat and the greed that ate her alive. I didn't feel pity for her, I just felt a cold sense of balance. The scales had tipped and the world was right again. I took Odessa's hand, and we sat there, two old souls who had walked through the fire and come out the other side, not burnt but refined. I closed my eyes, listening to the crickets, listening to the wind in the pines, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat, strong and steady. I had lost a family, but I had found myself. I had lost a son, but I had found a future. I had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and I hadn't feared evil, because I became the thing that evil feared. I became the truth. We spend our lives building castles for our children, hoping they will become princes and princesses who rule with kindness, but sometimes in our desire to give them everything we didn't have, we rob them of the most essential gift, the struggle that builds character. My wealth didn't save my family. It revealed their rot. Greed is colorblind. It corrupts the soul regardless of race or background. The true inheritance isn't the land or the lithium beneath it. It is the integrity to walk away from toxic blood and finding peace in your own worth. A parent owes a child roots, not a free ride to destruction. We spend our lives building castles for our children, hoping they will become princes and princesses who rule with kindness. But sometimes, in our desire to give them everything we didn't have, we rob them of the most essential gift, the struggle that builds character. My wealth didn't save my family. It revealed their rot. Greed is colorblind. It corrupts the soul regardless of race or background. The true inheritance isn't the land or the lithium beneath it. It's the integrity to walk away from toxic blood and finding peace in your own worth. A parent owes a child roots, not a free ride to destruction. If you were in my shoes, would you have given Terrence a second chance at the money, or did he deserve the shovel? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice served.